Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Talkin Ball live with Pat Leonard. I am the New York Daily News NFL columnist and Giants beat writer, and I'm coming to you here on May 23rd, 2024, after my first look at a full Giants OTA practice in the spring. And I have a lot to digest, a lot to explain to you guys, a lot to analyze on both sides of the ball, offense and defense. And we're going to talk about the quarterbacks. We're going to talk about my observations on the depth chart. And we're going to discuss what we gleaned about the 2024 roster and outlook from Brian Daboll's team on the field. I'll tell you who was there, who wasn't, where people were lined up on both sides of the ball. But I want to start with my primary takeaway from Giants OTA number 3. And that is this was a great day for Daniel Jones as the Giants' top quarterback on the roster. And it was a great day for Daniel Jones, even though he did not take a single 11 on 11 snap in the practice. Daniel Jones is doing well physically. He's taking 7 on 7 reps. He completed passes to rookies Theo Johnson and Malik Neighbors in this practice in 7 on 7. But when it went to the 11 on 11 period, Drew Lock was QB1. Drew Lock at the moment is the quarterback taking the snaps that he was promised when he signed here. He even told us when we talked to him after his signing that he at least knew he was going to get a significant amount of reps in the spring. So that presents opportunity. It also presents a possibility that Lock steps on the field and isn't necessarily showing his best stuff. And that's what we saw here on this Thursday practice. It was indoors because it was raining off and on at the time the Giants were practicing during the day. And Drew Lock had a tough day. He had a tough practice. Granted, he's learning a new offense. Granted, they're probably throwing a lot at him. It doesn't need to look perfect. It's not live football. It's frankly, he's standing there in a pocket created by Josh Ezeudu playing as a backup left tackle and really getting worked by Brian Burns, their premier pass rusher, the guy they added in that expensive trade and signing from the Carolina Panthers. So not ideal conditions for Lock, but he had plenty of time to make throws. Even when there's a sack right now, they continue to play on offense and they finish it. And a lot of times that ends up resulting in some more completions that can help the quarterbacks feel good about themselves by seeing a receiver catch and run. And even on the one silver lining play that Lock had, a deep touchdown to Malik Neighbors up the right seam, it definitely looked like that play could have ended in a sack. In fact, Brian Burns said at the podium when I asked him about how many sacks he had, he said all he knows for sure is that there's some touchdowns that need to be called back. And I read that as him identifying that big play, really the one big play, as the one that never would have happened in a real game. But Locke, really, when you look at how he was throwing the ball, and again, it's just one practice, he's going to have more opportunities to step up and shine. But in this, I would say it wasn't a limited sample size either. We saw significant 11 on 11 work. Brian Daboll calling the plays into the huddle to the quarterbacks, to Drew Lock. And when we were watching this, Drew Lock was either inaccurate on certain passes, missed a couple guys high, including Malik Neighbors off the top of his fingertips on one comeback route to the left side. Drew Lock, even with a decision making that was a little bit concerning on one where he rolled out to the right. He had somebody open in the right flat, but he tried to kind of force the ball up to the second level into a receiver who ended up somewhat in double coverage because another corner was peeling off and it was tight window. Ball hit the ground, was thrown low. Locke also threw a pass down the right sideline that was a sure interception that Dane Belton broke up, should have caught, dropped, but nevertheless, a good play by the safety and was able to read it easily. Not a good decision there. And just in general, Locke did not look incredibly comfortable. I would also say, even though Locke has some size to him as an athlete, he does not profile physically even as Daniel Jones does. I know Daniel Jones catches a lot of heat, and deservedly so for some of his subpar play. And obviously he has the injury history, which is a concern. But Daniel Jones he's a big guy, 6'4". He's strong. Like, he presents as stronger, pushing the ball down the field, and a guy who obviously can run. He's an athlete. Brian Burns even said that when they scout him as opponents when he was with the Carolina Panthers, the first thing Burns said is that they honor his athleticism. So that's something to remember. But when you look at Locke versus Daniel Jones, even as they profile on the field, what they're able to see down the field, I just feel like overall, my main takeaway was a great day for Daniel Jones because Drew Lock did not press the stamp down on this is going to be a fierce competition. Now, it still could end up being that. And obviously, one day's takeaway in not live football is not, that does not solidify anything. But when Tyrod Taylor was here and we watched him for several practices in the spring and in the summer, it became very clear very quickly that Tyrod Taylor was A, comfortable, B, that his teammates liked him, C, that he was making plays, especially plays down the field, and B, that he was challenging Daniel Jones. Now, they weren't giving Tyrod Taylor the starting job and turning it into a competition, but I think everybody saw as it bore out and he played more games that if you had to pick one QB to win a game for the Giants last year, it was going to be number 2, Tyrod Taylor. Now, he's not here anymore. Drew Lock is in with Tommy DeVito as the 3 and Nathan Rourke as the 4. But, when Tyrod was here, it became clear that there was a discussion to be had. In fact, in that first training camp with Brian Daboll and Joe Shane here, Tyrod Taylor very early was making it uncomfortable until the Giants essentially said, no, it's Daniel's job. And they pushed back even on the idea that he was struggling early. And obviously, Brian Daboll changed the way that the defense was able to practice in order to help him there. They make the playoffs in year 1. They fall flat in year 2. Now, Daniel Jones also came across very comfortable in his own skin, particularly with us, the media, at the press conference. Really was as open and honest and candid as we've ever seen him. Definitely taking control of his own destiny, if you want to say that way. And really what I mean by that is that Daniel Jones understands the lay of the land. He was very honest when he said that he wasn't fired up about the fact that the Giants were pursuing a quarterback and nearly ended up getting one. And he also rejected the notion at the same time that he needs anything like that to put a chip on his shoulder or have extra motivation. He said, I'm driven. I'm always going to try to go out there and prove myself and do the work. He doesn't need that to show him that. And even when I asked him about Drew Lock as competition, he said, listen, it's every year. You're always pushing to make each other better. Basically not worried about anything but playing better ball. Daniel Jones knows he has to play better ball. He's been accountable to that. And listen, we don't know where this is going to go. And obviously, you would rather that Locke looks good, not even necessarily to contend for the starting job, but just in order to prove that you have a backup quarterback who you can count on close to as much as your starter, because we know in the modern NFL, often the backup is called upon, if not multiple times a season, definitely at least once. So we want to see more from Locke. We want to see better play from Locke. But for Daniel Jones, and this is the exciting part, even when he wasn't catching the ball from Drew Lock, Malik Neighbors, the first-round pick out of LSU, was open consistently during this practice. I mean, it was one of those things when he was running routes, whether the ball was thrown to him complete, thrown near him incomplete, or he didn't get the ball thrown to him at all, then when he was out there, it was very clear that he was winning. That especially at the top of his routes, the way he was breaking them off, the way that he was making corners go one way while he went another, or finding creases and areas in the zone to make plays. I think the most exciting part was watching Daniel Jones hit him on an in-cut, hit Malik Neighbors on an in-cut during 7-on-7, and then watching how often Neighbors was getting open. Now, a lot of other things to watch, concerns about the offensive line, and of course, you want to see the quarterback play be strong and productive. But the best sign out of this practice was that Malik Neighbors continues to look, in what we've seen so far, a handful of practices. This is the most we've seen, though, and definitely love what we see out of, at least for now, it's number 9. So we'll see. But thank you all for joining me here on Talkin Ball Live. These chats just keep getting better and better. You guys are fantastic participating, dropping great questions, great insights that keep these conversations going. And they often end up going in conversations or in directions that I haven't even necessarily planned because you guys have so much insight into this team and you're so passionate about these New York Giants. So I'm going to tell you about our sponsor, Bet Online, and then we're going to get right into your questions. I see Joel Lopez with a super chat, so we're going to get right to that first. BetOnline is your number one source for the NBA and NHL playoffs this season. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds while the games are being played. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our 150 slot games. Wow. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Don't forget to use the promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet online where the game starts. And we start with Joel Lopez because he purchased a super chat. Remember, you can buy a super chat or a super sticker. That is the way to have your comment or question addressed immediately. It rises to the top of the queue. I get right to you. So if it's a question you want answered or just a point you want to make, then that's the way to do it. If you don't want to purchase a super chat or super sticker, that's fine. Just please hit the like button while you're here if you like what you're seeing and hearing, because that's a way to tell the rest of YouTube, the rest of social media, all the Giants fans out there who don't know about what we're doing here, and NFL fans in general. Doesn't have to be Giants fans. We talk all football here, but it's a good way while we are live to kind of push that. The algorithm does its work for us, and more people join our community and our conversations. Or if you just want to drop a question or just listen in, anything works, but thanks for being here. All right. Joel says, what are your thoughts on Daboll calling the plays? Well, I've been reporting since January that was expected, that Daboll is going to call the plays. And as I saw at rookie minicamp, as we saw now at this OTA number 3, Brian Daboll is the one walking into the huddle, calling the plays. He's got the play sheet in his hand, giving it to the quarterbacks. Mike Kafka standing at a pretty good length away from the offensive huddle, seems to be surveying the situation and the formation, taking notes. But even Shea Tierney seems hyper involved, standing right behind Daboll most of the time, as Daboll is in closest proximity to the offense. So no surprise there. This is what we've been telling you guys here for a while now. But I will say this. Is it going to work out? Who knows? But if Brian Daboll's back is against the wall and he's on the hot seat, as I have reported he is, as I believe he is, as I'm sure he understands the pressure is on, then I agree with going to whatever you do best. So if Brian Daboll feels like the best way for him to make the best and strongest case for himself as a coach and as an offensive coach and as somebody who can take this franchise where it wants to go, and if he feels play calling is the way to do that, then he should do that. Of course, last season was no way to handle that as well. It was almost like a coach who the offense is struggling and he's not taking the plays, but then he does. Then he gives them back. Then he takes them back. Then he gives it to Shea Tierney. Then he takes it back. Then Kafka has it. He took the offensive meetings away from Mike Kafka for a month at one point, running them as kind of the lead of that. And, that was a part of the management style that wore thin on a lot of the staff, offensively, defensively, et cetera. So that's another reason why it makes sense for Brian Daboll to just take the reins. All right. Thanks for that question, Joel, and for the super chat. G-Men says, Pat, my guy, thanks for everything you do and the information you gather for the fan base. Live streams like this come a long way. Thank you, G-Men, for saying that. He says, Pat, how did DJ look with 7-on-7 work, and how did Malik Neighbors do? All right. So DJ, Daniel Jones, limited 7-on-7 work. I mean, not a ton of throws. I don't know if it was 10 reps, might not have even been that. But he looked fine throwing the football. We didn't see him do much other than snap, read, and throw. But Daniel didn't look any worse for wear. I didn't come away thinking like, oh, Daniel looks like he's banged up. There were players off to the side not practicing, guys like Evan Neal, Matt Nelson, Isaiah Simmons, Aaron Robinson, Brandon Whitley, and then Jalen Mills and Tyree Jackson, the safety and tight end, both left with apparent ailments. Looked like Jalen Mills was looking at either the back of his leg or his lower leg, maybe his hamstring. I couldn't really tell. He was far away, but he was talking to the trainers, pointing to his leg. And then Tyree Jackson, Ronnie Barnes was looking at his left arm as he came off, and I saw him go inside. So we'll see that. So we'll get to more insights and updates through your questions, but let's keep getting through the queue. G-Men says, last question, what did the first team offense and defense personnel look like in 11-on-11 work? So first team offense, the skill positions I would take with a grain of salt as far as the depth chart, because it really looked like they were giving a lot of different guys a lot of different opportunities with different quarterbacks and different groups. So I wouldn't read too much into that. I saw people talking on Twitter about Hodgins doing some ones work, Hyatt getting on with some of the twos, those kind of things. But really, as it bore out, whether it was the running backs or the receivers, like I think Tyrone Tracy was in the huddle with Daniel Jones for the first 7-on-7, right? But that doesn't mean he's RB1 necessarily. You know what I mean? So, but that's something I think more in training camp, those will get more solidified. The offensive line, though, was interesting. Andrew Thomas did not do 11-on-11 reps. Not totally sure why. I want to say I think it's likely just them trying to be extra cautious because of how big of a deal his injury was last year. But I don't necessarily agree, or I don't agree at all with babying guys. I think you got to get them ready for football. So I hope we don't see that come training camp as well. And hopefully, obviously, there's no issue working on trying to get an answer there. As of right now, I don't believe there is one. He was doing other work during practice. He just wasn't out there in 11-on-11s. And then because of that, and because Evan Neal was off to the side, left to right, we had Josh Azudu at left tackle, Jermaine Illuminor at left guard, John Michael Schmitz at center, John Runyon Jr. at right guard, and Yadni Kajust at right tackle. So the defense was rushing the passer. I mean, they were in shells, wasn't pads, it's not live. But they were rushing, and the offensive line was trying to protect the quarterbacks, and they were not doing a very good job. I really don't understand why they have Azudu continuing to play tackle. He came in to the NFL as a guard. You practice him at guard all the last camp leading up to the season. You throw him in a tackle, and it doesn't work out. I know he was going against Brian Burns, but if you're going to play left tackle in the NFL, you're going to play against really good pass rushers. It's not like if they put the backup tackle in, the other team takes, their top pass rusher off the field and puts in their backups. Like that's not how it works. So the Giants tackle depth really, especially when you see, Neal and Nelson on the side, and we don't know if those guys are going to play at high levels, right? If Nelson's the swing tackle, is he a good swing tackle? We don't know. We know Evan Neal has to prove that he can play better. He's coming off that surgery. So I think the tackle depth reared its head. And then G-Men on the 11-on-11 on defense, the things that stuck out the most, Dane Belton was with the starters along with Jason Pinnock at safety, not Tyler Nubin, the second rounder. Deontay Banks, Cordell Flott, the outside corners, Jerome Henderson told me and some other reporters, kind of echoing what Brian Daboll said, but saying that he said flat out, if the season started today, we'd be rolling with Cordell on the outside. He did say they might even use him in the slot in certain games as far as maybe like following guys if he has a specific man. But today we had Nick McLeod playing a lot of slot. So Nickel McLeod is his new nickname until further notice. But then, everything else was expected. There were quite a few interior defensive linemen not on the practice field. So Nacho Roches, Timmy Horn, Jordan Phillips, they were not there. So Ryder Anderson was getting some snaps with the three big guys up front when they went 4 down linemen there. And so that was an interesting and good opportunity for Ryder, number 90. All right. Michael Knight says, "What's up, Pat? Anything good to report from training camp?" Yeah, I think just the way Neighbors looks really is number one. Brian Burns completely dominating. I mean, there was one point where he probably got his, 7th or 8th sack probably of the practice, or what would have been, right? And he steps past all the coaches standing behind the offense, and he goes like this, like exactly like, in other words, enough, it's over, stop the fight, right? Like he was basically saying like, next, because it looked easy for him out there. Good when you're evaluating him, bad when you're evaluating the guy trying to block him. Connor Hughes, the one and only Connor Hughes, has entered the chat, ladies and gentlemen. We're flattered here. He says, "Is this breaking Big Blue?" That's another, of course, strong Giants podcast. That's Jordan Ronans from ESPN. Go follow it if you don't already. I'm sure you do. Connor, also a legend. All right. MK5VW says, "I saw Connor's tweet saying Tommy DeVito was by far the best today. Is that true?" Well, it was basically between Locke and DeVito taking the bulk of the 11-on-11s, and Locke had a poor day. So DeVito had a better day. I will say, though, that Tommy, like when he has all the time in the world to make a throw, he rips it and makes a throw. But, I felt like I was counting to like 5 and 6 Mississippi on some of these plays where the completion looks good, but we remember last season in the real games, he was taking a lot of sacks because he wasn't getting the ball out and able to make the decisions on time. But certainly his arm looked good. He was completing some passes. Gunnar Olszewski stood out to me. He was playing with like the second and third team offenses and made a lot of catches in the flat. Looked good, looked quick, was obviously working on punt and kick returns as well. Danny Slow. It's a good nickname. That's a good name. Danny Slow Processor Duds. I'm going to take a sip in honor of Connor's presence here, taking a sip of some Angels Envy here. All right. He says, do you think Locke has underperformed so far in OTAs? I had high hopes thinking he would really challenge Daniel Jones for QB1. Danny, he definitely underperformed in this practice, only one practice. But we're just, my job's to tell you guys what I saw, and that's what I saw. So we're not able to see every single day, though. We only see 3 out of the 10 OTAs, and then we see the mini camp. But definitely will be worth asking Brian Daboll the next time we see them in a week about Locke, about his overall play, about how he evaluates. Let's see. Neighbors is him. What's up? Good to see you. Bill says that tweet made me happy for Tommy, but worried about everything else, Connor. Amen. Brolo says the front four seem to be an emphasis for the new defensive scheme. Do you think we have the personnel to be effective there? Brolo, it is an emphasis. Definitely after talking to Jerome Henderson, echoing kind of what we've heard from Shane Bowen, what I've heard from talking to people around the league about what to expect from this defense, right? I think the best way to describe it is we're going to see a lot of 4-man rush with coverage behind, and that coverage could be man-to-man. I do think we're going to see a fair amount of zone, like Jerome Henderson making clear that they're going to try to keep the ball in front of them, right? So I think you're going to see maybe in the passing game a bend but don't break mentality with strategic pass rushes, some dummy rushers, right? Like faking a blitz here while someone else is coming on the other side or in a different gap, that type of stuff. Wink Martindale used that as well. You are going to see man-to-man, but I think it's like Jerome Henderson described it as compared to Wink Martindale creating a new game plan every week, which frankly, I feel like has been the biggest strength of this team and coaching staff the past 2 years. So very concerning, obviously, that you don't have that anymore. But he said compared to a new game plan every week, this is more like we have a menu and we're going to pick different options off that menu every week, but it's going to be the same menu. So essentially that means we're going to master a certain defense and then we're going to play it to the best of our ability. And you might have some predictability in that type of scheme where people know what to expect, but it's the kind of scheme where if you're disciplined and you play it well, that you can play it at a high, hard-nosed level. And where it really comes down to, Brolo, is when you play like that and you don't get too exotic with your blitzes and you're not over aggressive in your pressures from all over, it really falls on the front four to rush the passer and make those plays. Kayvon Thibodeau, they're putting pressure on Kayvon now. Like Kayvon said, the time is now. It's now or never. I'm already in year 3. I understand this doesn't go forever, that kind of stuff. Charlie Bolin, the outside linebackers coach, really kind of lit a fire a little bit under Kayvon, basically saying like that he hopes like Brian Burns rubs off on him, that Kayvon needs to get better in all facets, that he needs to be more consistent, those types of things. And we talked about this last chat. It's very clear that they have Burns basically walking hip next to hip with Kayvon Thibodeau, taking him to the gym, working out together. Kayvon learning how to be a pro more so than he has been. That's something Bolin said as well. So yeah, there you go. Rick Bowman says, thank you for posting the full Jerome Henderson presser. The Giants only posted part of it and didn't include the FLOT assessment. Keep those coming, please. Thanks, Rick. Yeah, I can't get to every coach every time. So I figure every time we get the assistants, I'm going to pick somebody who I feel like either it's topical at that time, or it could be just knowing that it's the coach who gives the best interviews and usually provides the most information. But I'll try to get a rotation going so you hear from everybody. And so our YouTube channel, the Talkin Ball Live YouTube channel, it's at PL on NFL. If you're not subscribed already, hit that subscribe button. We have a lot more new stuff coming this offseason and this season, a lot more special guests coming on the podcast. So smash those likes, smash that subscription, and look for in my YouTube shorts as well. Like today, I posted Jerome's 11-minute presser on the videos, and then I put Daniel Jones at the podium on the shorts. And then I'll continue to pump things out there. Brian Burns clips, Cordell Flott clips, Kayvon Thibodeau clips, and on and on. H5000 says New England, Baltimore, Dallas on average have had good offensive lines over the last 10 to 15 years. Why have the Giants been so incompetent in building an O-line over the last 10 years? H5000, I'm going to need another sip of Angels Envy before I answer that. And if you're listening on audio on Apple or Spotify on the Believe Network, thank you for dealing with, my pauses of silence there as I sip some bourbon late at night here. But, it keeps us rolling here on Talkin Ball. All right. So H5000, this is something that, several of us in the media were just kind of shaking our heads about standing there on the field and then in the media room after practice today, is just the fact that the Giants so consistently seems to struggle to assemble a competent offensive line. Sometimes that's the problems with the starters. And then sometimes it's also the depth is so bad and so concerning that one injury decimates everything. And obviously that's no way to run a team. That's no way to run a position group. It's extremely concerning. So, I think it really comes down to their drafting first and foremost. Like if you think about the last 4 offensive linemen they have drafted, you have Andrew Thomas, Evan Neal, Marcus McKeithen, and Josh Ezeudu, right? Am I leaving anybody out there? And you think about Andrew Thomas was the previous regime, okay? And he struggled early, but of course has turned into a very good player. But Joe Shane's draft picks in 2022, you had Evan Neal, Josh Ezeudu, and Marcus McKeithen. We're waiting for any one of those players to show promise that they're definitely a guy. John Michael Schmitz is the 5th. I guess that's a guy I left out, obviously a second-round pick. So of Joe Shane's 4 selected offensive linemen so far, none of them have proven that they are as solid as they were drafted to be. Now, Schmitz needs to improve. Second-round pick, showed some good things. I do think that they count on him from a leadership standpoint, and they're still encouraged by what in the long run he can be for them. But as a 6-year guy in college, you need more from him soon and early and now. And obviously Evan Neal being, such a high draft pick, 7th overall in 2022, even with the injury last year and the misdiagnosis, it's just time to put up or shut up there. And so, to answer your question, H5000, it comes down to, it starts with those draft picks. Developing those players certainly is a part of it. Marrying the scheme to their abilities is also a part of it. For example, when Evan Neal got here, he's a top-heavy player. And I know early on, Bobby Johnson was having him do like some fire sets where you're kind of getting up on the defender quickly and kind of initiating the contact. And that could get Evan Neal very easily off balance if he didn't lock up and make that contact and get his hands on the defender immediately. And so that was not necessarily the best way to start with that type of player, for example. So it's a lot of different things. It's scouting, it's drafting, it's how you play these guys, it's how you position them. It's how the offense complements or does not their skill set, H5000. But it really is incredible that it's just gone this long and the Giants can't seem to get it right. Hopefully they get healthy and their players improve. But it wasn't encouraging watching what we saw on the field in this practice. I'll say that. Jay Jan supports us as always. He says Burns looks like he is enjoying his time in New York. Brian Burns is also representing himself and the Giants well so far. He definitely comes off as a leader and a guy who's comfortable in his own skin, which is welcome. Some more super chats here I'm jumping to, and then we'll get back into the chat. But really appreciate you guys supporting the channel. NFL Beast of the East says, what wide receiver and running back stood out outside the likely roster guys, like maybe Little Turbo or Bryce Ford Wheaton? Well, I mentioned Gunnar Olszewski. I thought Gunnar stood out to me as a guy who was open, who was making plays, who, like, when he got his opportunities, you noticed him. Ayir Asante, the rookie out of Wyoming, every time I've seen him on the field so far, I've noticed that he has some juice. He's got some shimmy to him. You know what I mean? Like he's got some juking and athleticism. It looks like he has some burst once he has the ball for some catch and run. So he intrigues me. Ayir Asante. So those are two skill guys who stood out. Theo Johnson as well. Like depth chart wise, that was one thing that stood out to me definitely is Theo Johnson. Getting like significant reps, first team reps. Catching the first pass I saw Daniel Jones throw in 7-on-7, looking athletic. Obviously, I'm excited, as I've told you, about what he can do in the running game as a blocker, too. Interesting that Daniel Bellinger was not at an OTA. Fourth round pick of Joe Shane a couple years ago, a guy who hasn't panned out so far. You would think that he would be at OTAs, even though they're optional. I don't see any reason why he wouldn't be. They did stock the tight end room this offseason. Jack Stoll, Chris Manhertz. Manhertz a big guy, by the way. You can see why he's an effective blocker. And then drafting Theo Johnson. So not sure about why Bellinger wasn't there, but that also factored in maybe to the amount of reps that Theo Johnson got, but he looked good as well. D Kit, what's up? Welcome back. D Kit's the man. He says, are you getting any comments from your colleagues about these Talkin Ball sessions? I wonder if any of them listen in from time to time. Yeah, it looks like Connor and Jordan, I think, have checked in tonight. Dan Duggan also listens. Dan consumes basically any Giants and NFL related content out there. I don't know if the man sleeps, but they all support as well. We like to give each other a hard time while also supporting each other because it's competition, but we're colleagues as well, and it's fun. If that makes any sense. But yeah, I think some of them are checking in tonight. So obviously they're bored and have nothing else to do. No, I'm just kidding. Joe Freed checks in with a $5 super chat, and he says, are you an Eagles fan? If you smile, we know. Joe, I grew up in Philadelphia as an Eagles fan, so I grew up in Philadelphia, but I don't root for NFL teams. Like I don't have that luxury anymore. I think you were the one who asked me in my chat last time we talked. You were asking me about being from Philadelphia. Where was I from? You felt like I didn't like the Giants. But I explained this to you. Like if tomorrow I got hired by the Philadelphia Inquirer to cover the Philadelphia Eagles, if the Eagles started getting everybody hurt and losing all the time and drafting poorly and firing coaches every 2 to 3 years and hiring the wrong coaches to begin with, and right, like if they started doing all the things that the Giants were doing, I would be crushing the Eagles. If I were covering the Falcons, it would be the same thing. If I were covering the Seahawks, like it would not matter. And then I would have the Eagles, or I would have Philadelphia fans reading me saying, who the hell is this guy? He came from New York. He's probably a Giants fan, right? Like, Joe, that's how it works. Is fan bases don't love to hear sometimes the criticisms of their own team. But I think there's plenty of fans as well who, to be loyal to your team, you want the best from your team. You want more from what your team is showing you. And I think being loyal to a team is holding the team's feet to the fire because you want to see the best out of them. It's like putting structure around a student to help bring the best out of them in school or whatever it is. I think the Philadelphia thing is overblown. I do. It was funny though, Joe. When who was it? When I was on SNY all the time with Daily News Live and then covering the Rangers, doing a lot of sports night, all that. Joe Beningo was on SNY's Daily News Live a lot with me. And there was one show when I was still covering the Rangers and still newer to like the public scene when we were talking off air, this and that. And Joe found out that I was from Philadelphia. And so we came back to our NFL picks and we picked like 3 or 4 games. And one of the games was Eagles versus Dolphins or something random. And I picked the Eagles in the game to cover whatever it was. And Beningo says on the show on live TV, oh, you're just saying that because you're from Philadelphia. And that was the first time that people on Twitter got in my mentions and said, do you hate the Rangers, right? Like all that stuff. So it comes with the territory in sports. But I promise you, I'm as objective as I can be, as any person who's trying to be is. I covered Notre Dame football when I was a student there, criticized them. I'm a Notre Dame fan. I went there wearing the shirt right now, but criticized them. Late last season was crushing the Eagles. Anytime I talked about them for how trash they looked, how many problems they've had, how it didn't look like Jalen Hurts was getting guys to respond to him, all that kind of stuff. So not an issue, but I can understand why a fan would ask, and I have no problem talking about it. James says, love the show. Thank you, James. My thought on Waller is he and Shane have agreed that he'll retire after June 1st, so we get the cap savings and he goes out on his terms. James, that's possible, but like you don't need to wait till June 1st to retire. Like Darren Waller, like Jason Kelsey retires in March or whatever, and then the Eagles can just make that a June 1st retirement as far as how they file the paperwork and how they categorize it in their bookkeeping, right, for salary cap purposes. So that could be possible, but you don't need to wait to June 1st to do that. Like Darren Waller could have just said in February, I'm retiring. And then the Giants will be like, okay, it's official, it's done. And then we'll file the paperwork, come June 2nd or whatever it is. So I don't really think like that's at first I thought that might've been, an issue, but it's, I don't think that has anything to do with it. If it does, if they're waiting on that, I still don't follow why they would have had to wait that long. All right, let's see. The one and only Connor Hughes says, Pat, first time, short time. Can you explain to the listeners how PEDs improved your putting when we played our match and you one putted 17 times? Yeah, so Connor's a good golfer, but I held my own with him because once we got to the greens, I was money, man. Drive for show, putt for dough. Drive for show, putt for dough. Connor says, just a quick follow. If you have to take a drop, it's okay to put it in the middle of the fairway, right? Yeah, especially if you shank it all the way to the right, like as a righty, if you just fade it, into the houses, like in Florida, let's say, those backyards where they have it all fenced in so the alligators can't get in the pool. You just got to make sure that if you hit it into one of those backyards, you take the ball and you throw it back into the middle of the fairway rather than drop it right where it went out. Exactly. Jordan Ronan in the chat. Hi, it's me, Bordon Bonan. Oh, okay. Yeah. Sounds a lot like this guy from ESPN I know. We'll see. He says, do you think Dable wanted to choke you today? I think I held back on some of the questions that might lead to some physical altercations. But yeah, so Jordan on his podcast, Breaking Big Blue, I believe it was a Giants After Dark. He was answering a question from a fan about, does Brian Dable ever want to choke you at press conferences? And do you ever see him getting riled up? And Jordan had some fun with that one. Definitely over the years, I've had some interesting things. I think I told you guys the Pat Shurmur story on one of these chats about him staring me down like for a full 10 minutes during a Thursday media session with like 5 reporters standing around him in the hallway. Super uncomfortable. Also had a locker room, not altercation, but a good locker room back and forth with Pat Shurmur one time as well. That's another good story. Bookend says, we all know DJ is going to put the work in. That's never in question. He's always been a hard worker. He doesn't need fire under his feet to put the work in. Totally agree, Bookend. Just will it translate to the field? Exactly. No Mets says Dable is looking slimmer. Yes, no, he's been working at it. He's typically good at kind of, getting the weight down in some of these off seasons. The challenge is when the losing starts and the season starts, it's keeping it off. And listen, I'm not one to talk. I mean, I have the same problem. You're in front of a computer all the time. You're drinking 100 cups of coffee and you're eating and you don't even realize you are half the time. Neighbors says, hey, Pat, I realize OC is different than head coach, but why didn't Dable just call plays from the get-go? I feel like if he thinks that's the best way to win, then he should have just done it from the start. Neighbors, that's a great question. And that's how I felt about last year, too. It's like the yo-yoing back and forth, the browbeating of your offensive coordinator, the finger pointing of your offensive coordinator when it's essentially your offense that he's calling. So you've had control of working through it all week. You've been talking about it all week, how the offense is going to go. And then what? You're angry on game day, or you take play calling away on game day, and you kind of subvert or undermine that coach by giving it to a coach below him at one point. Like, just not the way to handle it. And these are reasons why it's fair to be skeptical. Rick says, Jordan, nice drop in on NFL Live. The look on your face when you couldn't remember I wasn't fired up about it was funny. Nice rebound. Yeah, Jordan probably had a look on his face like that because it was so shocking that Daniel Jones had a soundbite that actually made news, right? Because Daniel, just like Eli Manning, like is very like able to be kind of like coached to say nothing, to kind of talk to you for a while without saying anything at all, giving anything away or being overly emotional. So that was the most that you've seen out of Daniel in a while, kind of standing up for himself. So I could see why anybody would have maybe hesitated while talking about it or acknowledging it. OG says, what's up, OG? He says PFF and CBS Sports rank Daniel Jones as the worst quarterback in the league. I've been saying his stats are mediocre for 5 years now. Daniel Jones got his money. Let's move on. DJ is going to be trash again, guy. OG, that may be the case, but I'm just telling you guys that what I saw from Drew Lock on the field in one practice, and again, one practice, but just bringing you my takeaways. What we saw this practice from Drew Lock did not say anything about Daniel Jones losing his job. Like what we saw on the field today was, wait a second, do the Giants have a strong backup? And when Daniel Jones is healthy, this is his job to lose. Savage Steve says, well, how are we feeling? We're going undefeated. Just kidding. What really stood out to you today, knowing that it's just the beginning? And what are we drinking tonight? Yeah, Angels Envy bourbon again. And I'm actually running low, which is a little upsetting. Just means I'm drinking it too quickly. And Savage, really, I think the most encouraging thing, Neighbors, Brian Burns, those guys making plays, making it difficult on their matchups. And, I think it's encouraging that they're putting a lot of faith in Cordell Flott and confidence in him as far as like building him up. And, I listen, Nick McLeod, I think, deserves a chance to win that job. So I'm not saying that it shouldn't be a competition necessarily. Everything should be a competition. But I do like the idea of settling in on something at these key positions early and trying to make it work from the jump. Like Brian Daboll wouldn't answer us. Like, a couple of us were asking about, hey, would you rather not rotate your offensive line so much and get your starters set working together? And obviously he just wouldn't give anything there. He wouldn't answer it. He wouldn't say, but you have to imagine, like we saw last year, rotating guys every snap in a 3-man guard rotation is not the way to go. Like you need to get guys into the spots they're going to play, and you need them to work as a cohesive unit of 5. And so for the outside corner position for Flott, I do think McLeod deserves to be able to compete there. But as a young guy, as a draft pick, as a guy who's developed pretty well so far going into year 3 in Flott, I do like the idea of, if the coaching staff feels like he's up to the task, handing him the keys kind of in pencil, if that makes sense, and saying like, run with it and show us what you got. I don't hate that either. Kevin says, hey, Pat, do you see Daboll changing the offense much with the addition of Neighbors and losing Saquon? Oh, yeah, Kevin. Yeah, I do. I mean, they need to run the ball to be an effective offense. There's no question about it. But I think that this is going to be the closest to what we saw in Buffalo as far as pass heavy running backs, flaring out of the backfield as options in the passing game, using the quarterback mobility option off of those passing plays, the way that he used with Josh Allen in Buffalo. Now, obviously, he tried to open it up at times last year, and the offense fell flat on its face. They had injuries. Jones didn't play well, didn't handle it in certain key situations, and the offense just never got off the ground. Definitely going to be more of an emphasis on building it around the passing game. But this defense, like, listen, this Giants defense, any defense, okay? Any defense needs help from the offense in managing the games. And I know everybody thinks that this defense is going to be able to carry this team, but I'm waiting on both sides of the ball to show what they have this year. There is more talent on the defensive side of the ball, and the front looks better with Brian Burns on it. But is that pass rush going to get to the quarterback consistently? Number one. Number two, are the Giants going to have leads so the other team has to throw the ball and the pass rush can really be unleashed? Number three, are they going to stop the run, right? Like Andre Patterson today was asked about how different the technique coaching of his players is from Wink Martindale and to Shane Bowen. And he says, it's the same because I do what I do. I do what I do, right? He said that defensively. Well, they're one of the worst run defenses in the league, right? So what he does needs to evolve and change. And things are going to change because they have a less experienced defensive coordinator here with a new system that they're installing. No guarantee that's going to hit the ground running. Now, we do know Bowen's defense has been good at stopping the run over the course of when he has been able to call plays and when he's helped run defenses. He went from Houston, Tennessee. So we know that he stopped the run better. That's going to be an emphasis. They want to play downhill and aggressive there. But I just think that, Kevin, the way I brought this up to the defense as well was, even though I think Daboll wants to throw the ball more, the defense is going to, at times, need the offense to control the ball and control the clock, right? And be able to have some, 10-play, 80-yard drives, right? Or 12-play, 78-yard drives. Like, you need some of that out of your offense. It can't just be all pass. And we know from 2 years of Daniel Jones in the system that the way he can succeed in it is being able to use his legs and lean on the run game while also making targeted plays in the pass game. OG says, Daniel looked good in practice the last 5 years and stunk for the season. Who cares what he looks like in practice? When is he going to beat the Cowboys or throw for 30 touchdowns in one season? That's fair. Christian says, you already talked about the backfield, but as someone who has watched OTAs for a while, how confident are you in our secondary? Hope it's not a weakness, but the room is rather young. Christian, that's another reason why I'm waiting and seeing on this defense. Very inexperienced on defense and very young. Jerome Henderson, not shy today about saying what we have talked about on here, right? And what people on the outside talk about if they're skeptical, let's say, of Deontay as a guy who's going to ascend to be the number one. Jerome Henderson met it head on. He said, before any of us could say, Jerome said, that he's eager to see Deontay Banks take that next step and become that number one corner, right? Because he said he does have a ways to go to get there. There are things he needs to do. And primarily, he said, when I asked him a follow-up, I said, well, what are the things, right? He said that he has all the physical skills and physical tools, but what he needs to do is essentially grind the film and learn on the mental side, what are these teams trying to do to me? When I see this formation, when I see these splits, when I see this receiver in this slot, what am I supposed to expect? What does he do well here? What does he not? What are his tendencies? What are the offense's tendencies? The play calling? What's the audible going to be? All of those things that come with playing football, but also being studious and diligent about the details of the game. And so, Deontay is a guy who, just to your point and your question, Christian, for the Giants secondary to be good, you need a second-year corner in Deontay Banks to take another step and be a one. I think there's a lot of people in the league who think he's a good player, but they think ultimately on a good team he's a two. Like he's the corner playing opposite your star corner, if that makes sense. Now I love Deontay's game, but he does need to take another step. Tackling in the run game is one way, but also, as Jerome said, Jerome Henderson, the defensive passing game coordinator and DB's coach, as he said, it's also about taking that next step. But Flott, is he going to win that outside job? We'll see. If he does have it and he's earned it and it's given to him and he takes it, how is that going to work out? That's something we'll have to wait and see. Nick McLeod in the slot, is that a solution? Is Drew Phillips going to come on quickly enough? We saw him doing like some things with the first team, especially as like a fourth corner out there. If they had 6 or 7 DBs on the field, well, 6 really. I don't know if I saw 7 at any point. And then also running some stuff with the first team when they were just doing some install, but then even at the safety position, Pinnock, a guy who has some imperfections in his game, is athletic and a really good guy and can help in a leadership role. Dane Belton, really cerebral, a guy who can make plays on the ball. But again, a young player. So I share, Christian, your skepticism. Another reason why, as we talked about earlier, the 4-man pass rush is a big deal. Like the 4-man pass rush really is something that it needs to get to the quarterback and affect the quarterback consistently, because this is not a secondary that, if the other quarterback has a lot of time, in my opinion, that is going to hold up in those situations. But most secondaries don't in that regard. D Kit with a $10 super chat. D Kit, thank you so much, man. D Kit really are one of our biggest supporters. And, really great, smart questions. I really appreciate you. D Kit says, I'm actually expecting Jones to try and change his image a bit this year. Saquon is gone. I can see him trying to be more vocal and aggressive with you guys. His prior Tamu Eli stuff wasn't working. D Kit, I think you're right about that. My takeaway from his interview today was, and this is actually probably worth writing about, because I wrote about Daniel Jones today off of that and things he said and how he reacted, but I didn't write about this specific point, which is that, um, you know, I think Daniel is, listen, he's smart. He understands that the Giants have pulled away from supporting him the way they did prior to this offseason. And like, just think of it this way. We all know that John Mara did stand behind Daniel to an extent at the owners' meetings. And he said, listen, we couldn't even like get a pass off because of our offensive line, all the injuries. We couldn't protect him. The kid was getting beaten up. He didn't even have a chance. Let's see what he can do with a good line, all those things, right? So John did defend him. But even while the owners defended Daniel Jones, out of the other side of his mouth, he had to admit, yeah, if Joe Shane and Brian Daboll love a quarterback in this draft, they want to go get him, even if they want to draft one in the first round or make a trade for one. I'm all for it. Let's go. Let's create competition. Let the best man win. So even the owner who's the one accused of essentially clinging to Daniel Jones, right? Even John Mara came out publicly and basically said, listen, if we're going to draft the guy, it's going to move us on from Daniel. If they want to do that, I'm ready. So Daniel sees all that, right? And he understands that. And D Kit, I do think we saw the beginning of a Daniel Jones who's taking not just the Giants team by the horns, but also like his future, his fate, his destiny. I actually realized it was a mistake not asking him, I think, about Darius Slayton's absence, because if Daniel's feeling this feisty and this honest, and listen, this goes back to, remember when Michael Lombardi, the former GM, has a great podcast, the GM Shuffle. Do you remember when he brought up that disease of me point, the idea of like with guys like Dexter Lawrence, initially missing the spring before his contract, Saquon Barkley then with that long absence during the spring and the offseason prior to that, kind of the friction between the Daniel Jones, Saquon tag deal, all that, and how that can have an effect on the locker room. And I definitely think, forget the phrase disease of me, because I know people hear that word and they think, how toxic that implies things it can get. But really what it indicates as well is just if people in the organization, if players in the organization, key players, feel like they're not being treated right or correctly or fairly or a certain way, and they don't like the way an organization is behaving and ultimately not rewarding them, and they start bucking and they're leaders and they all are friends and they're talking to their teammates, that can become something that becomes contagious. And this is why I said, you have to be aware of Darius Slayton stepping out and doing this now after the way Saquon Barkley felt like he was treated and didn't like the way that things were handled with him. You have the James Bradbury situation, obviously, with Joe Shane. You had, the Nick Gates situation with the Giants front office. You have a lot of these instances where players don't exactly feel like it's rubbing them the right way that the Giants are handling their situations, whether it's contract related or how they're talking to them as directly as they are about what they are and aren't. It's almost like, hey, let's get an arbitrator in here so that it's a little bit more diplomatic. But Daniel Jones, I think, is another example now, D-Kit, of maybe seeing the lay of the land and saying, oh, yeah, no, this is a business. I can see them about to run me out of here right at the very next sign of anything going wrong. So I'm going to step out and be me. And I think, D-Kit, that's as good of a point as anyone's made on this chat, in a long time by you there. I think that's a really good point. Another $10 super sticker. This one coming from Chris. Chris, thank you so much. Chris says, I don't get why we have any confidence. His best season was 2022 and just was a game manager, threw 15 touchdowns. He almost has doubled, just keep his job. He almost has to have doubled just to keep his job going forward. Chris, I think it's hard to feel confident. I agree. I think that this whole team, Daniel Jones included, we're all in wait and see mode. Like, show us, enough of this, like blind hope, enough of this, unwarranted optimism. Like, when you're not playing against another team and when you don't actually see it on the field, you can work up hypotheticals that you feel excited about. But when you watch the team on the field, like we did on Thursday, and you see so many concerning signs about so many different things, especially things like the quarterback and offensive line positions that are just right now feel like they've been, problems for years on end. It's exhausting and it's discouraging. So I'm with you there. But this is Daniel Jones's last and best shot, because like I said, the one encouraging thing coming out of this practice was Malik Neighbors was open a lot. Where are my entertainers? Says subdued early impressions of Newbin and Tracy Jr. Thanks. They were two of my favorite prospects. I didn't see anything stand out about Newbin either way. Not a negative, but other than the fact that Dane Belton was ahead of him with the first team defense, that was the one thing that stood out. But not enough of a look at Newbin's game consistently, like in any way. Tracy Jr. He looks like bendier and shiftier. Almost like a guy who can kind of squirt through some holes in the running game and be like a useful, versatile type guy. I would like to see some high end, open it up speed from him in certain situations. Didn't really get to see that today, but definitely saw that receiving element. He, has good hands out of the backfield. Neighbors is him says, what has Neighbors' primary role been in the offense? Well, I've seen him lined up to the right of the quarterback most often. Sometimes he runs out wide. Sometimes he's in the slot. I feel like he's in the slot more often. But outside and on the inside, he goes in motion. Obviously, Daboll uses a lot of motion. So you can see Neighbors starting over there and then running out to the left. But definitely I've seen him running often to the right of the quarterback, running his routes to the right of the quarterback. And listen, when he puts his foot in the ground and changes direction, he's just moving at a different speed. Like he's not slowing down, Raymond says, Pat, you should do some crossover podcasts with the guys from Big Blue Banter and Talkin Giants. Steven says, hey, Pat, was watching PFT Live and they were talking about Micah Parsons. Just reminded me how much of a fail Dave Gettleman did, passing on him and trading down to a failed wide receiver. Passed on special player despite getting a first. Yeah, and the frustrating thing about that, Steven, is basically, clearly they just weren't going to take Micah Parsons. They had some reservations about him. And, I think if he fell dramatically, maybe he would have ended up on the board. But we'll see, if he becomes a problem in Dallas here as the contract issue kind of rears its head. And maybe if they start to lose and continue to falter and fail, and if Jerry starts to break up parts of the team, we'll see if teams like the Giants, who had reservations about Parsons coming in, were founded or are not supported because he's that elite of a player who continues to help the Cowboys win games. But definitely a player the Giants could have used, that's for sure. And then you look now, it's interesting. The Giants now, with Joe Shane in charge, have drafted guys with arrests on the record. They drafted a guy in Kayvon who was well documented, was a player and a personality that could rub people the wrong way. How good of an influence will he be in the locker room, whatever he makes that draft pick, those kind of things. So Shane's not afraid of taking risks or drafting guys with, so-called flags in certain areas. So the Giants now are doing that, but in that year when Parsons was on the board, they did not. OG says, I blame John Mara in the front office for all this. The Giants were competing with themselves when they signed Daniel Jones. No other team wanted him. Yes, they were competing with themselves there. Jay Farias tells OG to stop crying, OG. But Jay Farias, I do think OG is disappointed in his team and in his franchise, and he's allowed to be for sure. I don't disagree with him that, listen, when the Giants have big problems in key areas, it goes all the way to the top. It doesn't just stop with the head coach. Mills said, better start analyzing schemes better, processing slow. Kayvon, relying on a coach to determine how he counteracts to adapt. Danny Dudd says, Giants and Mara have always liked Daniel Jones more than any other team. AJ notes that, yeah, I forgot JMS initially. My bad. Thanks for catching that. Steven says all the Giants have to do with the offensive line is turn their draft board upside down. Steven, oh man, quote of the night. D-Kid says Tommy DeVito seems to have hit the ground running, Pat. I heard he put the time in this offseason. Yeah, we'll see. I mean, he needs to get the ball out faster. There were plenty of plays today where you were waiting for the ball to come out. It did eventually for a completion, but took too long for what he would need in a game. And that's obviously what we saw last year. AJ says we haven't drafted the right linemen. The 2022 linemen were Bobby Johnson picks. They're all backup level until proven otherwise. AJ, that is not true. The general manager made those picks. That is not Bobby Johnson picks. Like, that's not how the NFL works. Like, the offensive line coach does not get to draft offensive linemen at 7 overall. He's certainly a part of it, but the general manager is the one who makes those picks. RJ likes Daniel Bellinger. Justin says, Pat, thank you for all your great work. I appreciate you, Justin. Thanks for saying that. Did you notice any difference in Daniel's demeanor when answering the questions regarding his future and then potentially trying to replace him this past draft? Yeah, definitely more of an edge. Daniel, I think, sounded like he's looking out for himself as much as ever, in a good way, not being selfish, just recognizing the lay of the land and knowing that if he doesn't stand up for himself, no one will. So I think that was good to see. Let's see. RJ says, yep, we suck. We know. Mel says, we do not need distractions, guys. DeVito, path, ESPN scheme. Thanks for Monday Night Packer victory. Got to be kidding for bringing outsiders in to influence the outcome. Mel's, what are you referring to there? I'm not following you. When you're talking about, like, your previous comment, you said, so that's bringing in outsiders. Your previous comment was relying on a coach to determine how he counteracts to adapt. Just clarify what exactly you mean there. Maybe I can provide some clarity as well. OG says, why don't Chris and Bad Dog like you, Pat? I don't know. Who are you talking about, OG? I don't really follow you. Mad Dog? You talking about Mad Dog Russo? Mad Dog and I are good buddies. I love Mad Dog, but I don't know who exactly you're talking about there. Let's see. Neighbor says, I grew up right outside of Philadelphia, hated them above every other team all my life. Interesting. Molly Mall says, what's up, Pat? Keep up the good work. Molly Mall, thank you. Welcome. Good to see you. Stevie says, Pat, do you think the absence of Darius Slayton will hurt the wide receiver core? I do think it's unfortunate not to have that veteran voice in the room, as well as he's one of their best and most experienced offensive players. So, yeah, that's detrimental. Steven says, why didn't the Giants keep Shermer? He was getting the best out of DJ. All they had to do was get a new DC. Pat was not, the locker room was tuning him out by the end, feeling like the message wasn't necessarily consistent and, as genuine at times down the stretch when the pressure turned up as it needed to be. So he was losing some of the guys with that. But he certainly has got the most out of Daniel Jones by far. And I think really it's not a shot at anybody. Some coaches are just better coordinators than they are head coaches. It's okay. Like Steve Spagnuolo, maybe he gets another head coaching job again and turns it around as a head coach, but is he a great defensive coordinator? Yes. Would it be wrong or bad if he was just a DC the rest of his career and his defenses were continuing to win championships and make offenses' lives a living hell? I think that's fine, Where are my entertainers reminds everyone to hit the like button. Thank you. Where are my entertainers? I appreciate you. Stevie says Drew Lock is a third string Jameis Winston. Ooh. Mel says, thank you, Pat. On point with your topics, fella. Damn, Joe Judge ego is still hanging around. I thought Joe Judge was the best CEO coach I've seen here. I like Joe Judge. Certainly had some flaws in the way they ran the offense, jumping off of Jason Garrett and then the way they tried to fix it at the end there. And there were definitely some players who didn't like his style, but I thought Joe Judge got a raw deal. And I thought that if he stayed for that third year, facing that favorable schedule that Brian Daboll and Joe Shane got in 2022, then I think Joe Judge, does some winning there. I think the undoing, though, was when they got rid of Shermer and they hired Judge, and they kept Gettleman. And then after the first season, they kept Gettleman again, right? Instead of like marrying Judge with a general manager who was of like mind and creating some consistency and some alignment there, they kept those two guys together. They were oil and water. And eventually that was kind of the undoing of all of that. Let's see. JJ with a $2 super chat again. Thank you, JJ. And he says, Pat, you're the man. So is Bowen an upgrade over Wink? We will see, JJ. I don't think so. I think he's going to have to prove that he is before anyone could even ask that question. Because Martindale, like, the proof is in the pudding for what he's done in his NFL career and in his football career, especially in Baltimore and in the first season where the defense was the major reason why the Giants ended up going to the playoffs in 2022 with that 9-7-1 record. And so, I think that, like, for Jerome Henderson to talk about the simplified nature of Bowen's scheme, could that be better? It allow guys to play faster, maybe, but also, like, who creates new game plans every week for their opponents? As he said, Wink Martindale did on defense. Bill Belichick does that. And I remember hearing people say that was one reason why Bill was so efficient and so effective, was that he always had unique schemes and game plans to take things away from the opponents that he was facing that he might not have used all season until that game. And I remember hearing that and thinking, wait, every coach doesn't do that? And you find out, no, like, a lot of NFL teams and coaches, they have one style they play. And so they're more predictable and they just try to beat you with what they're best at, even if it's coming. But it always shocked me that more coaches don't do what a Belichick or Martindale does. So no, I don't view that as an upgrade, but Shane Bowen obviously has a chance to show that he is, he'll get that chance. Chris with $2 says, do you think we will be a pass first offense this year? Yes, I do. That's Brian Daboll's nature. And D-Kit with a $2 super chat says, JMS is flying under the radar. What are your thoughts? I think as a center, his job is to be sound and to be a leader, right? I think that, and also obviously to get them in the right play. So, being sound means, like, interior offensive linemen are like referees, right? A good referee is somebody you never hear about the ref all game. A center, that's kind of like when you don't hear about John Michael Schmitz, that's good, right? It means he's doing his job. I think the interior offensive linemen, and really mostly, like, it's unusual that I'm telling you guys about how worried I am about seeing Josh Azudu there at left tackle today, because normally when it's this early and it's not live and, guys aren't in pads and you're not seeing true one-on-ones, you're not overly evaluating offensive linemen this early. But that's what made it so concerning in that regard, was how bad it looked this early with Josh Azudu, even in that look. So that's part of why it came up like that. But as far as JMS, like, nothing stood out to me today either way with him. I think really his play matters, but also, Justin Pugh's not on the Giants, at least not right now. I mean, he's still a free agent. Maybe he ends up coming back and helping provide kind of that glue in the room and all that, because he really is an effective player in person with that type of thing, and a good influence on the young players. But the Giants need guys who are on the field to be leaders. And right now, based on what they did with the O-line, it doesn't profile like Justin Pugh would be coming in to start on this line, based on them investing in John Runyon Jr. and Jermaine Illuminor, who are now both playing at guard. So considering that, I think you look at the offensive lineman on the field, Andrew Thomas is going to lead by example guy. He's not a rah-rah, like, speech-making leader. He's your left tackle who's going to dominate, and that's all you need from him, and that's what he's going to give you. And, you look at the rest of the line, and John Runyon Jr. stands out as an obvious leader candidate based on what people have said about him, what type of guy and player he is in person. But John Michael Schmitz as the center, as the tip of the spear of that line, and as a 6-year player in college, a captain with the Minnesota Golden Gophers, that was a huge element of them signing him, as well as his play. And so I think JMS, that's what you want to see as much as anything, is his leadership as well as his playing. All right, let's get some more questions here. Beast of the East says, do you think Burns and Kayvon can break the sack record of 39 in one season? No, I do not. Stevie says, actually, he did beat the Cowboys in 2020 without Dak Prescott. Are you talking about Daniel? Or are you talking about Judge? Judge, like the only coach who has really beaten the division rivals any more than just like a one fluke time or whatever it is. Finally, Daboll got on the board with that win over the Eagles late last season. I think he and Shane are 1-8 against the Cowboys and Eagles. D-Kid says, I always get the feeling that Daboll wants to start his every answer he gives to one of your questions with F you, Pat. He definitely kind of grits his teeth as he's looking at me as I'm asking my questions, doesn't he? It's like you get game day Daboll whenever Pat Leonard asks a question, basically. That's funny, D-Kit. That is funny. All right. Where are my entertainers? Says, okay, let's get to the next question here. It's not confidence in Jones, Chris. It's sunk cost with a capped wallet and a low ceiling team. You'll be glad you got Neighbors, and vet QB options aren't the route. Yeah, that's the hope, is like, regardless of where this goes, you got something in Neighbors there, right? Christian says, I very much think Daniel Jones was given more time and money because of ownership. And personally, I think he can do well. With literally no football experience besides being a fan, I think we got burned by year one. Yeah, I think so too. I think they overreacted to year one, which is surprising because even though Daniel made some good plays and had, the big game against the Colts and then the wild card game against the Vikings, by and large, you had to look at that season and understand that you didn't win because Daniel put you on his back necessarily, right? Like if anybody on offense did, it was Saquon Barkley, but really it was the defense and the way they had structured game plans for facing specific opponents. Peter Randazzo says, God help us if Azuda is the only option as a backup tackle. Are you hearing anything about Tyree Phillips? Haven't heard anything about Tyree. Obviously, he's been a better option, though, when he's been here and healthy than other guys who have played over him. Peter, I agree with you. I can't understand, and I'm not trying to dump on Josh Azuda at all, but like, I really think it's unfair to him to put him at tackle. Like, he hasn't shown that he's good at it. He hasn't been playing there until last year when they threw him in there right at the start of the season. I mean, I just don't understand it. And if you guys were at practice today here on May 23rd, OTA number 3, like, you would have been pulling your hair out watching the offensive line and watching Azuda at left tackle. Seriously. Let's see. Joe says, Brian Burns replacing Ojulari. Any insight on how they plan on using Ojulari? To me, he is our 4th best pass rusher. Definitely in a mix. I mean, you're not playing these guys all 100% of the snaps, right? So you do need to get a rotation going. I do think you're going to see on obvious passing downs, you're definitely going to see like a NASCAR type package with, Aziz, Kayvon, Brian Burns, and Dex as the 4 maybe. I love to see that. So definitely use him strategically. I think with Aziz too, with his injury history, if you can find a way to use him strategically and target his snaps, so maybe you're giving him, 20 snaps a game, and they're all in high leverage, like 3rd and long, 3rd down, or key passing down situations where you're unleashing the NASCAR. So you keep him healthy and you use him situationally. Like, maybe that's the best way. Joey B says, what's up, boys? I heard that Cutlets was cooking today. You see any improvement from him or edge that makes him a dark horse? I mean, he was making some good throws against the second team defense. I think that Tommy obviously proved that he was ready for the moment last year, kind of to handle himself through it all, but showed some shortcomings, specifically in his ability to get the ball out, to not take sacks. And obviously, the longer he stayed in, the more overwhelmed he became. Of course, thrown in there as an undrafted rookie, not an easy thing. But Joey B, I would take with a grain of salt what we saw today, because some of his best throws were throws where it took a while for the ball to come out. He did hit Jalen Hyatt down the sideline over top of Trey Hawkins on a nice throw deep. Let's see. RJ says, was Wandale in the backfield at all? I don't believe so, RJ. I do think he went in motion into the backfield at one point and threw, but I don't think I saw him at running back. I don't think so. I don't remember it. D Kid said, I think an interesting off the beaten path story is Azeez Ojulari, a very talented player who's been riddled with injuries and failed expectations. Does he emerge or wither away? Well, I know he's a great kid who works hard. I can tell you that. Like, I don't just say that about anybody. Like, he really is. Easy guy to root for. And I think he might be a good guy to get on the podcast, don't you think? Like a guy who can earnestly talk about some of his frustrations, but also his high end potential, his excitement for what's to come, his ability to contribute in that room, how he's going to be used, those kind of things. Definitely. And this is D Kit. That's a good example too of like the Giants can do some good things on defense and as a team this year if they get something out of Azeez Ojulari and he doesn't get hurt. If the high end guys in front of him are playing well, if the interior defensive linemen like Jordan Phillips and Nacho Roches, who are playing alongside Dexter Lawrence, play at a more consistently high level than we've seen from them recently. There's just a lot of ifs about some of those things. So like the Giants can be good in some of these spots, but it's like they need everything to go right for it to look good, if that makes sense. Like Azeez is a good example of that. Could he give you a lot? Yes. Could he be a huge game changer? Yes. But can you count on it? Right. Tuto, my man, Tuto always checking in and supporting the channel with a $5 super chat. He says, salutes and respects to Big Boss Pat and all diehard Giants fans across the pond, and slap all doubters, haters, and stinky Boyds losers. Greetings to all from Cardiff, Wales. Greetings, Tuto. You're the man, always supporting the channel, always bringing in more loyal and passionate and diehard Giants and NFL fans into the chat. Thank you for always being here. And if I forget later, happy Memorial Day upcoming and Memorial Day weekend to everybody. Basically kicking off the beach and summer season here in New Jersey in the Northeast. So looking forward to some time near the pool while also continuing to work the phones and continue to grow our Talkin Ball and Talkin Ball live communities here on the YouTube channel. PL on NFL is my handle. That's my handle everywhere. TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Threads. On X, I am P Leonard NYDN for New York Daily News, the New York Daily News NFL columnist and Giants beat writer, also with the Believe Network here on the Talkin Ball with Pat Leonard podcast. And if you are new to our community, just know that we have a lot already on the channel, content for you to consume, interviews. Jerome Henderson, the DB's coach, a full 11 minutes up there now that you can check out. YouTube shorts to give you updates, the latest on your favorite team and on the league. And Talkin Ball lives post game, which is something that we love doing during the season. That's something I'm really excited about this year. We're going into year 2 of doing that, where I come out of the locker room at each and every Giants game, and I bring all the updates directly to you from the locker room, from the field, from the stadium, home, road, wherever it is. Be from Germany this year. Looking forward to that. And really just a great way to digest immediately. And that's what I think you guys can get here that it's hard to get anywhere else, is firsthand accounts, information, opinions, and observations from me, somebody who's covering the team day in and day out on the inside. Like, I'm talking to you after watching this full Giants practice, right? Like after watching a full Giants OTA. I'm privileged to do it. I feel fortunate that I'm able to do that and kind of be a conduit to you guys. And then you obviously all make great points and understand this team as well. And so it helps drive these conversations to great places. Let's see. Bill with a $5 super chat says, hell yeah, get Azeez on the show if you can. I feel like I've never really heard from him. I actually have a signed ball of his and would love to see it. All right. I'll work on that. Azeez, that sounds like a good one. I'll work on that. All right. Let's get to the next question here. We have Christian says the Waller trade was a mistake. There was so much put on him as a weapon, but was a maybe by day one. I feel like we sort of set ourselves back a year by being successful in the first year. Yeah, and the Waller move was also a move for the Giants. They were trying to load up last year and take the next step. If you remember, Sterling Shepard came out and publicly said that Brian Daboll was essentially talking about the Super Bowl as the goal. Kayvon Thibodeau admitted after the season that he felt like they were a team that was going to contend for the Super Bowl. So the Giants, again, poorly self-evaluating, not fully understanding who and what they were. So that's always really disappointing stuff, but that's been a recurring problem for them as an organization. So that's something they need to fix and that they've been unable to fix, recently. All right, let's see. Next question. Let's get to Where Are My Entertainers says, big money that can't take the field is a team killer for sure. Popularity reminds of the Patriots' Josh Uche can be useful and explosive, but not on every down edge. Both still young. DPR. Yeah, on Aziz. I got you. Oh, okay. Ojolari reminds you of Josh Uche with the Patriots. I get it. Yeah, that makes sense. Dan says, hop on Talking Giants with Bobby and Justin. Also, love you, Pat. Thanks for the content. Thank you, Dan. Really appreciate it. Thanks for saying that. Kyler says, Giants and Jets renew their lease at MetLife every 5 years. MetLife is not a good stadium at all compared to others. Will they build a new one or move? Where is a good spot? Giants need their own stadium. Nothing cooking there, Kyler. I mean, a lot of investment in that stadium made, still not too long ago in the grand scheme of things. So haven't heard anything about that, but I agree. The stadium does very little for you. I get it. Mel says, second string QB position, guys. We have come too far building our players from scratch. Loyalty. DeVito can play in this league. Interesting. Michael says, finally caught alive. All right, Michael. Thank you. Thanks for being here. He says, I think Slayton is a trade candidate. Yeah, I think that's possible as well. I think that's could be the more likely result. If Slayton is really going to end up playing this to the end and standing his ground, like I don't see the Giants giving him a bump based on what Joe Shane said. Obviously, maybe they do. But again, this goes back to our conversation about you have to be careful about how you handle the locker room and treat players, because players see the way that you handle someone else's situation in negotiation. And Slayton, was a victim of that type of treatment and that type of negotiation tactic and being forced into taking a pay cut just to stay in the first year, even though he was one of their best weapons, right? So he's got to look out for him. I do think he's smart enough to understand that it's probably not going to result in a major raise. So that's why I agree with you that it's possible this goes the route of him either seeking or asking for a trade or anticipating that one might be likely. I don't believe that the Giants have the luxury to trade a player like that. But, listen, they're joint practicing with the Detroit Lions. So they're practicing with the Detroit Lions. When the Lions come here to East Rutherford, that'll be the second year in a row they practice joint practices with them. And then they're doing one day, Brian Dable said, in Florham Park with the Jets, the week that they play the Jets. But, if this drags into August, remember the Lions now, they know Slayton. Obviously, they know Slayton anyway. NFL teams know Slayton. But joint practices last year, they saw him up close. They have that tape. They'll get another look at him possibly in August if he's in camp with the Giants then. Even if he's not, you have the Lions here in person. That's a team that needs a third wide receiver. So maybe that's a match. That's just one team that feels like a match. Bookend Tackle says Joe Judge lost the job when he kind of went off at the late season post-game presser. Yeah, no, that didn't help. That didn't help at all, right? That was obviously a mistake, but nothing he said in that press conference was not true. RJ says, do you believe there is a world where this season, if it goes bad, Dable is gone and Shane stays? In my opinion, it just became Shane's roster fully this season. Feels like we always go nowhere fast. I think there's a chance they both lose their jobs if the season goes badly enough. There is also a possibility based on how it goes badly that Shane would stay and Dable would go. The Giants definitely more than ever don't want to blow it up. But Dable, of course, with his behavior last year and with how so many coaches left and wanted to leave if they didn't leave, he is up against it. And I think the fact that the team's roster doesn't look as good as you would have thought this late, like we're in year 3. This is not year 1. This is not year 2. It's time to start mentioning the distant past. And Shane has mentioned that they still aren't just one or two players away, but you wonder how long the rope is there as well. Michael says, do you think Bill Belichick will be the Giants head coach next year? I think it's a possibility. Yes, Michael. And I think it's only going to get louder. I saw Chris Long on the Green Light podcast. It's a great podcast. Chris is great. I saw him talking about this is like what Gary Myers and I were talking about on the Talkin Ball with Pat Leonard podcast. You can watch our conversation on the channel here or listen to it on Apple or Spotify on the Believe Network as well. But the idea that Bill Belichick is a very real candidate and possibility for the Giants if the Giants fall flat on their face again this year. And, there's also a connection to Joe Schoen in that Bill Parcells has good relationships with both of them. So maybe that's a possibility, or maybe it just becomes Bill Belichick comes in and it's his show. That's another possibility there. But Michael, the fact that I've been talking about it for a while now, but when national media or podcasts like Chris Long's on Greenlight, when they're talking this early about how obvious it is that Belichick could be the next head coach. And, Chris said it the way I tell you guys, like Chris said flat out, he's like, if they lose again this year, Dable's gone. That's what I've been telling you guys ever since the end of this past season. I mean, this past season went so much worse than people even want to admit. I've obviously done the reporting on that, but people, sometimes they don't see it for themselves. They don't fully believe it. Neighbor says, Judge lost me at punting is aggressive and our terrible records. Terry says, Pat, how did Evan Neal look in practice? Did he look fit and taking instructions of the new O-line coach well? Terry, it was a little disappointing to see him not on the field really with the team, just mostly on the side doing work. So he's continuing his rehab. Didn't really get to glean much as far as how he was being coached or how he was playing. Michael said, I think because Mara screwed us by telling Shane to stay competitive. Barkley would be in Houston right now, and we'd have an extra 3rd round pick. Michael, that's something I agree with you. Like, I do think. Now, listen, would Joe Schoen have traded Saquon Barkley if the organization said we don't want you to? I don't know. I mean, I think Joe Schoen though was a part of that decision. I don't think it was just John. Like, that was Joe as well, at least from the way I read it. But that could be possible as well. Definitely organizationally was a huge mistake for them to act like that, let's not make this trade, especially Michael. Like, one thing Joe Schoen should have stood up on the table and said, John, we can already see where this is going. This guy is not going to be on our team next year unless we completely turn the season around in these final 8 weeks or whatever it is. Like, if you really have conviction and where it's going as a general manager there, you have to stand up. I know you have an owner. I know he signed your checks, but you're there to tell him that, right? So that's on him too. RJ says, to me, this scenario where Dable could go and Shane stays would be if Dable's management of other coaches continues to look bad, but guys like Flott, Thibodeau, etc., do look good. Yeah, there are scenarios where it could go like that for sure. But I do think if the Giants are very bad this year, it's going to have to do with personnel as well. But yeah, we'll see. There definitely are those scenarios, RJ. I think you're right. Chronicle says, Pat, what's up, brother? Reporters are saying Daniel Jones looked pissed off and has a chip on his shoulder. Pissed off DJ is when he plays the best. Could this be good for us? Yeah, I think he's definitely motivated by it. I think he, you could tell the human part of him resented the idea that they were trying to possibly replace him. So just because they didn't doesn't mean he feels any better about it for sure. He's also accepted of the fact that he just needs to play better, and he knows that that'll take care of itself either way. Chronicles, pissed off. I wouldn't, I don't think Daniel necessarily looked pissed off, but I think he was very honest about the fact that number one, didn't love the idea they were pursuing a quarterback and everything he saw, the homework they were doing, and that they might be replacing him. And then number two, he even said, when he was watching the draft, he goes, I was watching and waiting to see just like everybody else was. So it was almost like this idea of he was expecting it possibly to happen, and he was on the outside of those conversations and what to anticipate and what to expect. So I thought that was very interesting. Definitely had an edge and a chip on his shoulder. Jay Jan, what's up? He says, I just hope we know either way with Daniel Jones finally. Jay Jan with a 3rd super chat. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. D Kit says, bookmark this, Pat. Belichick won't be the next head coach. D-Kid, thanks for the support as well. If he's not the Giants head coach, I think is a good chance he'll be the Cowboys' next head coach instead. So wouldn't exactly be fun to have him in division coaching Dallas with a more talented roster. Mel says Slayton is very much a trade asset. Better not give that guy a $15 million. Number one wide receiver option where he has a lot to offer, and I'm very happy. Sheeps do not really need Shepherds. Okay. Christian said, who is starting next to Sexy Dexy? Well, Nacho and Jordan Phillips weren't there. Ryder Anderson was in that spot today. I think more than likely, you have Phillips helping to stop the run. You have Nacho. You have like a rotation there. Probably Jordan Phillips, or it should be Jordan Phillips, you would hope. So we'll see. But definitely like Jordan Riley saw some run there next to Dex as well today. So Jordan Riley, Ryder Anderson, those guys. D-Kit says Jordan Phillips, Pat, I actually think he can contribute if he stays healthy. We need a 3-tech to emerge. Yes, desperately. Again, going back to stopping the run. Need to stop the run. D-Kit calls Tuto the Grand Master, no doubt. Barbara, great to see you. She says, hi, Pat, I finally caught you live. Yes, you did, Barbara. Great to see you. Drop some questions in if you have them. Antonio, good to see you, man. Barbara says, she's down because of the Knicks, but recovering. Yeah, Kayvon said that watching the Knicks made him think about, listen, it's time for us to go. It's time for us to do it. He said some people come up to him and say, you got to be next. So the Giants trying to draw some inspiration from that. Christian says, hey, Pat, sorry I'm late. How great is it that Dre is working with the outside linebackers? Insane to me. Kayvon Thibodeau said the D-line and outside linebacker groups weren't always as connected by Wink. Christian, I really didn't like that line of conversation from Kayvon Thibodeau and Dre Patterson. I frankly think that Kayvon saying that indicated that that's what he's being told. That's what I viewed that, because somebody asked him exactly what he meant by that. He couldn't really fully describe exactly what he was referring to there. So that sounds like a line of conversation or points that are being made by others to Kayvon. So that tells me that probably there are coaches still in the building, people still in the building, talking trash on the previous defensive coordinator, pointing the finger. And that's not a new thing, obviously, from what we saw from the coaching staff last year. And, to me, doesn't reflect well. Dre Patterson working with the OLBs, I don't think that's great. I think that he needs to get his group to play better, because I think they had one of the worst run defenses in the league, and he coaches their defensive front. So I think that we should stop, measuring who's bigger. And I think we should get to playing like winning football. That's what I think. I think people talking trash on people who are no longer here, who were helping the team win and be better, need to understand their place. And also, when they're going to say those things, they need to put their money where their mouth is and actually perform. That's my take on that. Let's see. Antonio says, if Darren Waller decides to retire before June 1st, will they just make him a post-June 1st cut due to the difference in savings? Yes. RJ says, if Hyatt looks more like a wide receiver 4 deep threat guy still, doesn't take the jump to wide receiver 2, I would want Slayton extended if the price is right, while Neighbors is on a cheap deal opposite him. RJ, I think that's sound thinking. Do you have any idea how soon Aaron Robinson may be able to get back on the field? He was pushing a sled off to the side at one point today, was still on the side. I really do think I don't think it's worth believing that he will solve their problems in the secondary once he's healthy. He wasn't that kind of player before he got hurt. You do want added bodies and competition and hopefully get the best out of them. But I just want to couch that with my update with I would not count on him like solving all their problems. Michael says he would trade Darius Slayton for a 4th rounder tomorrow. Oh, 4th rounder. Yeah. I think it would be more like a 5th would be more likely what you're getting in that. Michael says that he thinks Shane and Dable are a package deal. Got to give them till 26. Michael, we asked John Mara if he viewed them as a package deal, and he said no. Very interesting and telling comment, I thought. D-Kid says, was there anything that you heard regarding the Giants having difficulty attracting quality UDFAs? Looking at the list, I can't help but think we didn't get the top guys who actually may have helped. Haven't heard that specifically, D-Kid, about this class, but the Giants have had issues in recent years with players not necessarily viewing them as a destination because they aren't one. So that is a concern. Then on the flip side, you have guys like Drew Lock who look at it as, oh, wow, like this team's kind of floundering in this area, and that's an opportunity because I want to play, right? Michael says, unless the Giants win 5 games, they're not going anywhere. Yeah, no, that's what I mean. It's like another bad season. Bill said, can someone just ask Slayton, are you looking for a bump or just a paycheck past the season or a little of both? And do you think he would answer it? Been working on that. Going to see if Slayton's going to, talk about that on the record. I'm sure the way that he's going to handle it is there will be a time where if it's unresolved, he will probably talk about it. But that time has not arrived yet. Michael says, I don't really want a 70-year-old coach like Belichick. If they knew they weren't going to re-sign him, there's no way a playoff team wouldn't have offered a third and our pick would have been higher. Oh, yeah, right, with the Saquon at the deadline. If they knew they weren't going to re-sign him, there's no way a playoff team wouldn't have offered a third and our pick could have been higher. I'm happy we got Neighbors. Totally agree. RJ says, same, Michael. Only coaches I'd actually feel good about if we moved on from Daboll are Ben Johnson and Bobby Slowick. Michael says, I'm still pissed they didn't get capital for Barkley and McKinney. No doubt. Bobby Slowick would be a name to watch next year for sure if Daboll is out. Joe Freed says, if Belichick gets head coach position, who would shop for the groceries, assuming Joe Shane is gone? That's a good question. Don't know the answer to that at this moment. Christian says, they're doing hard knocks in the offseason. This seems like a compromise for not doing the actual hard knocks. If they are willing to show the back end, they must feel confident in it. Christian, I think it's a way for Joe Shane to try to get the message out there that they are running an advanced and strong and competent process. I think this will serve as, PR and propaganda to try to make themselves look as favorable as possible. They hope going into a winning season. So I think it's going to be a way to show confidence in themselves and show us what they want to show in order to indicate, like, here's where we stand as an organization. Michael said, I like Joe Shane's processes for drafting a player. We are much more lengthy and speedy team since Shane took over. I do think you need to see some of his picks pop though. Like I think his drafting, he's drafting traits, but the players need to perform. That's what I think. I do like a lot of Joe's process. I agree with that. Like when you talk to him about why he did certain things, I feel like there are legitimate, answers and processes and advanced scouting like behind all of it, but you still got to hit on the players. Michael says Joe screwed himself right away by drafting Evan Neal. Not looking good so far. We'll see if he can turn it around. RJ says, I'm so happy Patterson is working with the edge guys too now, Christian. Malpractice for him not to. Yeah, I don't really follow why you guys think that. It's not like there was no like obvious problem here. I don't really follow that line of thinking, but you're obviously welcome to think that. Big Dog says, agreed, Pat. RJ says that news legitimately got me really excited. Yeah, I don't follow that. What reason would you list for why the edge and D line would be improved with Andre Patterson involved in it? Brad says there are lots of smoke screens you still get from teams at this point. Let's see. Mel says, please retire. I guess I don't know if he's talking about Belichick. Hope he's not talking about me. RJ says, has Dexter lined up over the guard more against different formations or in any looks stacked up on one side to get him one-on-ones? I think part of what, the main thing that helped Dex the most was Wink Martindale putting him over the center. So I think that's the favorable way to use him. We'll see if that changes. Barbara says, I wish we could have figured out a way to keep McKinney. I really liked him. Yeah. And he, a leader in the back, a loud voice in the back. D-Kid says, yeah, I agree with you that type of talk from Patterson and KT is useless, but Patterson is credited for bringing Danielle Hunter along. So I don't think it's a bad thing to get his input. Hey, collaboration can help. I'm just saying I don't see any evidence that that's like some salve or some resolution to some issue. Let's see. Mike says, I feel like Kayvon would know if there was a disconnect between the O-line, outside linebackers, and D-line. I don't think he's taking a shot at Wink. Well, whether he means to or not, Mike, that's what it is. Kyler says one, but I'm also saying, Mike, like that sounds like something he's being told, not that something he's noting. Kyler says one thing I noticed is the Giants always draft over their picks. They drafted Gray to draft Tracy, drafted Flott to play slot to draft Drew. Why do we do that? Is that a testament that we can't draft? Yeah, Kyler, teams do that when they draft a player at a position and he doesn't fix the problem. So it means that their previous pick didn't pan out to what they drafted him for. Mike says Patterson turned Dex into a new player. Why wouldn't that be a good thing to include the edge guys in his room? He turned Dex into a new player? I mean, okay. I mean, we'll see. We'll see. I guess we'll see if it was Andre Patterson or Wink Martindale. I guess we'll see. My real problem with the Giants is that I don't have any idea what their plan is if things don't work out at the QB position this year. What's the plan? Jones is a huge price tag in 2025. D-Kit, you ask people around the league that question, and their answer is the draft. People don't like the veteran route, but obviously the draft doesn't look the way that this year's did. So, it's murky. Michael says, I agree with everything you're saying. I just think Shane and Dable are at the point where they finally get the baseline of what what their team is. I know we're going on year 3. Terry says, do you see us looking at any quarterbacks that could be a trade or released as rosters are cut down? Any real smoke with a trade for Hooker? Nothing definitive on Hendon Hooker. Still no evidence that the Lions would actually trade him, but obviously would be intriguing if they would. I guess like if Michael Penix Jr. becomes the guy in Atlanta and Atlanta tries to bail out of Kirk Cousins, and they eat some of the money later in the offseason, do you go and get Kirk Cousins, right? Like something like that. But you're still talking about cap hits. You're talking about committing to an older veteran with a team that's not good, right? Like that's their problem. Like their team's not ready to win. So you can't just go and get a veteran either. I do agree with that about Dex over the center, RJ says, but this front will be different, and that is another way to utilize him. Yeah, possibly. Bill says, John Giles has the McKinney hair, just the mirror image. It made me laugh. D-Kid says, if I were the Giants and Kayvon and any of the coaches or players, I would reference 2023 very infrequently, probably never. Agree. Michael says, we're finally at a baseline of a good young core. You hope so. Mike says, I thought Patterson was the one that coached Dex up on his technique and then he broke out. That's what I always heard. He's been their position coach, but, I think it started with Martindale moving Dex over the center and then kind of scheming it for him to have one-on-ones a lot, right? The way that they've schemed up the defense is giving him the right matchup. So Dre Patterson certainly obviously has been coaching the player, and Dexter has been blossoming under him as well. But I'm pushing back, Mike, on this idea that somehow Wink Martindale's defense wasn't going well on the defensive front, and that Dre Patterson is the answer to help the offensive outside linebackers, and that he's the reason Dexter Lawrence is a star, but somehow the previous DC doesn't get credit for it. Like, I don't get it. I don't get it. Michael says they do need to start to produce now, but Gettleman's contract crippled us with players Dable didn't want, like Golladay. Yeah, that's true. Gripe says, Pat, it's kind of odd you have all these criticisms of the defense, but never attribute any of it to the actual coordinator at the time, but place blame on all these position coaches. What all position coaches am I talking about, Gripe? I'm not placing blame on all position coaches. Not at all. I mean, definitely everybody, Wink Martindale included, deserved blame for that disaster in Dallas, right? Like where they just got absolutely shredded. That Wink Martindale deserved blame and credit, just like every coach deserved blame and credit, right? Like Mike Kafka deserved blame for some of the play calling at the end of the Rams game, but Brian Dable also deserved blame for managing the game. Wink Martindale deserved blame when they gave up the 600 some yards in Dallas and the game plan and how the defense played, Gripe. I don't, maybe you're misreading. That's why I was clarifying. I was just pushing back on that specific point about like somehow that, the defensive breakdown was, above these position coaches, but now these position coaches are going to fix it and figure it out. But no, blame to go around for sure. When teams lose, everybody has a part in it, Martindale included. I just felt like Martindale was and his defense and the scheme's impact, and they were tied for the league lead in takeaways, was the best thing about their team the last 2 years. But yeah, no, great. No, I was just responding to that specific point about like where the credit deserved, that kind of stuff. Let's see. Michael says, I was at the Dallas game. It was the worst loss I ever saw. D-Kid says, we stunk last year. Every member of the organization had an awful year. Yeah, right. Exactly. Exactly. Barbara says, Pat, in your opinion, why didn't the Giants take McCarthy when he was right there? He could have sat a lot and learned this year and grown with the team. I guess we try for Carson back next year. Yeah, I think it was just a matter of feeling like he wasn't the prospect as far as measurables and ability to become a star that they viewed as worth of that pick. They determined that despite his winning credentials, that physically his talent wasn't what they were looking for in all of the tools that they want to display in Daboll's offense. He saw more of that raw ability that he could harness and kind of elevate in Drake May. And I agree with you though. Like JJ was right there in that sweet spot of like not ready yet, but a guy that you could, get your hands on, mold as a ball of clay of a quarterback and take him where you wanted to be. It's interesting like that Minnesota would take him too, because that's a really good offensive coach and Kevin O'Connell. So it really will look bad if JJ McCarthy turns into something good that the Giants passed on him, right? Joseph says, I'm going to love to watch Daniel Jones shut up all these haters. Christian says, you sound far more down on this D-line than anyone else. I also think the defense was the strength of the team for the last 2 years, which is bad for an offensive head coach. Do you think offense takes off? Christian, I'm not down on the D-line. I think it's very obvious that Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence, and Kayvon Thibodeau are the strength of the team and need to be the strength of the team, right? Like as far as how the roster is constructed. All I'm saying is, their interior depth is not strong, right? You need these guys to step up, play better than they have been playing, whether it was here or elsewhere. Jordan Phillips, Nacho Roches, Jordan Riley, whoever else is in those slots, right? On the interior. Your run defense needs to be better, which includes the play of your defensive line and your interior defensive line, obviously. And listen, they weren't stopping the run capably when Leonard Williams, a guy who's one of the higher pedigreed, higher paid defensive tackles in the league, was playing next to Dexter Lawrence. So not having that capable and that caliber of player next to Dexter, that's concern, right? So, those are the things. That's what I'm saying is just like the potential is there. The investment is there. The excitement is there, but they still have to do it. There's pressure on them to do it. I'm not down on them. I'm just not assuming it's going to happen. Like we have to see it happen, right? We have to see it happen consistently. We have to see them dominate. I do not think the offense takes off unless I can feel confident in, the number of weapons, the offensive line play, right? Because listen, Daniel Jones, we've seen good play from Daniel Jones, but he's not going to take a bad offensive line and an offense with one elite explosive player and just put it on his back and become an elite offense. It's just not going to happen. Let's see. Michael says, I'm skeptical of our new coordinator. D-Kid says, Joseph, I have no confidence in Jones, but that doesn't mean I want him to fail. Joseph Santiago says, Wink Martindale's attitude got him fired from 2 teams, and now he's not even in the league. What are you talking about? Joseph, I think you are buying one side's version of a very complicated and more nuanced story than that. I don't agree with your point. I do know there are people selling what you're saying. But obviously if you read my reporting in the Daily News, it was far more than, it wasn't Wink Martindale. It was Brian Daboll and like different relationships and management of his entire staff, which is really kind of what went wrong last year. Martindale just became the guy who stood up and said he'd had enough, essentially. Michael says the answer on JJ McCarthy is simple, that Neighbors is a blue chip and JJ is a backup. He won't look good week 1. Yeah, we'll see if he's even playing. Barbara says, thank you for answering, Pat. You got it, Barbara. We get to all of them here. Mike says, do you think Wink got the boot from Daboll because Wink wouldn't adhere to his game plans? There's no question the defense was the only bright spot, but the head coach is the boss, right? He did not get the boot. He resigned and walked out and quit. I mean, so that's what happened there. Martindale didn't want to be here anymore, didn't want to work here anymore. And I mean, the head coach is the boss, but like I said about offense and defense, and special teams, part of the concern with Daboll last year was like he was MFing people and he would get angry and lose his temper and lose it on people. And then when it was time to say, okay, well, what's your idea? Like the solutions weren't there. It was yelling to yell. It was criticism without the constructive part behind it, right? Constructive criticism is good. Blame game is not, right? Blaming your defensive coordinator for a loss against the Jets where the offense had like negative some yards passing, right? What was it? -8 yards passing, right? Like that's the kind of conversation and demeanor and leadership. That's not leadership, right? And so that's part of what that is. For sure, the head coach is the head coach, but you need the head coach to be a leader and to be somebody who collaborates and also needs to be an expert in the things that they're telling the coaches they want changed and done. So yeah. Strength of the team for sure. Chronicles says, you think Nacho would be the one by Dex? I think it's possible that that's Nacho for sure. It will need it, those guys all need to step up in that rotation. D-Kit says, when did expressing skepticism about position groups or a player that do need to raise their level of play become a bad thing? Yeah, D-Kit, I don't know. Catching some pushback on what I felt was some pretty obvious comments. Chronicle says Wink did dig his own grave mostly. Not gonna lie. Yeah, I disagree. I think maybe I should post the link to my story on what happened with the Giants last year again here. Super Unknown says, what's up, Pat? Good to see you. Super Unknown. Entertainer says, thanks for the show, dude. Seems to me like Daboll likes big quarterbacks. The Giants do as well, entertainers. Like height, strength, and arm, how they throw the football deep. All those things matter to them in a big way. McCarthy has a lot of things, but not NFL big. So 25 quarterback prospects by height and start there, sort them like that, and you'll know where they're going. That's funny. Joseph says, Wink, Martindale, Motor City had enough of Brian Daboll, but the rest of the league said they had enough of Martindale, along with Harbaugh and the Ravens. Well, Joseph, I actually viewed that as, there were a lot of people talking behind the scenes about what went wrong with the Giants there. And I think it's very clear that Martindale's well was poisoned by some people's version of what happened, if that makes sense. So that had nothing to do with like the quality of his coaching or necessarily the reality of what happened, but more of people, listen, the NFL is a cover your ass business. The NFL is a business where like a head coach, if they hear a rumor about something, even if they're told it's not true or that one thing happened and they heard another, they are still looking at, well, I got to protect myself. I got to, steer clear of anyone who I think is going to rock the boat. So even if it's not true, right? Like those kind of things, so they steer clear of it. So so people spread rumors and also, talk behind the scenes to discredit people, it's unfortunate. That's what happens. Chronicle says Wink tried to bypass Daboll and make decisions, which is never the thing you should do to your boss, especially personnel stuff that he tried to make happen with Tamon Fox. That was a complete overblown, inaccurate story about Tamon Fox with the jersey number and trying to undermine. I mean, the fact that the Giants launched that propaganda piece in like return fire or whatever you want to call it about Martindale to try to make him look bad. And that was the most damning thing that they put out there. I mean, that was hilarious. Like, holy cow. Like, come on. Christian says, thank you for answering all my questions. I appreciate it. This is awesome for me as a fan to ask you questions. I feel like the press for the press. Yeah, no, thanks for participating, Christian. Really good questions. Super Unknown says, I saw your interaction with Daboll today. It was full of subtext. That's really well said. Daboll getting angry reminds me of the Eagles' meltdown having to do with Big Dom not being around to calm down Sirianni, Bill said. That's funny. Mike said, the only thing I hate about Daboll is his lack of composure and freakouts. It's horrible character trait of a leader, but I think it's redeemable if he cuts it out. Well, it also, you have to take responsibility and accountability, and you have to have answers for the problems, right? Super Unknown says, I agree with everything you are saying about Dable. Christian says, concerning Dable, I think that's learning as well. He was a rookie that had big success, needs to get back to the basics. Yes, he's not as experienced as people think. Super Unknown says, post the link to that story. Yeah. D-Kid says, Dable was a first-time head coach. He had a dream first year with a bad roster. When things went bad, he didn't handle it well, and Wink didn't either. Not real hard to understand. Dable needs to be better. I'm going to find this Wink Martindale story again and link it in here for those of you who care to reread it, or maybe you didn't see it before when we published it at the end of the season here. All right. So Barbara says, Bill, you're en fuego tonight. Bill says, thanks, Barb. Super Unknown says, what happened to Damon Fox? Tell us the real story about Damon Fox then, Pat. Chronicles, I'll tell you guys that story next time we're on here. It had to do with like what jersey number he was wearing, and Dable saying something about, or the Giants saying something about that he had put him in a different jersey, even though that Dable didn't okay it or something like that. And he was trying to sneak him into the lineup, something like that. Let me refresh kind of the details of that story for you guys. Go back into my reporting from January and February, and the next live chat we do, we'll talk about what actually happened there and what that was versus how it was reported. I promise you that. Christian says, hey, Pat, earlier I just meant Dre working with outside linebackers should have the entire front four in unison to get pressure, because it's going to be a lot of pressure on 4 players, and we only know 3 of them. Yeah, I get you. D-Kid said, Wink isn't here, Dable is. I only care about 2024, whether we will score more than 15 points this year. The Wink stuff makes me nauseous to keep talking about. D-Kid, I agree. That's what's outrageous about the hearing things like people pointing the finger at a defensive coordinator on a team that was literally near the bottom of the league in all offensive categories and stats. Like, why are we talking about the defense, right? Like, and that even went for last year. Like, why was Brian Dable pointing fingers at the defense? The offense couldn't score points, right? Franklin says Dable's a good coach, but needs a quarterback to work with to maximize his offense. Solving says, respect to you for reading all the comments, interacting with the fans, and giving the only unbiased, unfiltered reporting on the team. Salute. Thank you, Solving. Appreciate you too as well. You guys are great. Bill says, sounds like it's much more like what didn't happen with Fox, Michael, based on what Pat is saying. Yeah, I'll tell you guys. I'll get back. What next chat, I'll refresh my notes. I'll go back over my notes on all that, and we'll talk about it. His neighbor's clearly the number one weapon so far, said Franklin. Yes, and he has to be. Super Unknown says, I don't put much stock into OTAs anymore. After all the nonsense that came out about Jones' connection with Waller, that was really a hot stove. All of us got burnt. D-Kid says, I read that article you wrote when it came out, and my head exploded. Christian says he likes Damon Fox. Super Unknown says, no injuries, no injuries. Yep, you hope. Bill says, well, it looks like I have to subscribe now. Yeah, Bill, jump on board. Let's go. Franklin says, has there been any conversation about getting Jones to let it rip? Playing passive is killing this offense and team. That's definitely what Dable as play caller needs to unlock, Franklin. It's not only marrying the play calling with exactly what he's looking for in games and taking control of it and feeling like he can do that best, but also getting the most out of Daniel Jones. And last year, they tried to open it up and unleash Daniel more so closer to what he did with Josh Allen. Didn't work out for a lot of different reasons. But yeah, they do need Daniel to let it rip. And listen, they just traded in a top running back for a top wide receiver is essentially what they did as far as how they're building their offense. So that tells you everything you need to know to answer that. Oh, Bill's talking about the Daily News, subscribing to the Daily News. I see. Yeah, I was going to say, I figured you were a subscriber here. Oh, come on. The Daily News subscription. I mean, it's cheap nowadays. Bill, I'm surprised, man. It's a lot of good coverage you'll get in there of the Giants for sure. D-Kid said, we need a good scandal this year, so we stop talking about last year. Make it happen, Pat. Terry says, is Bryce Ford looking like last year? Bryce Ford Wheaton made a nice catch in practice today. It was one of those plays where Tommy DeVito had the ball for a while and probably would have been sacked. But when he made the throw, before Wheaton made a nice, like, kind of diving catch over the middle from left to right. Timothy said that should the Giants trade Daniel Jones to the Raiders for Devontae Adams, 25 third rounder and a fifth rounder, and 26 third and seventh rounders, and name Tommy DeVito their starting quarterback? I love the idea of getting Devontae Adams, but no, I would not endorse naming Tommy DeVito their starter. If anything, I guess if anything, it would be Drew Lock in that scenario. But after today's practice, that didn't look good. Christian said, if Neighbors isn't the number one option, I don't know who is. I don't want to put pressure on a rookie, but he's supposed to be good. I hope him being good doesn't affect the Giants getting a better quarterback. Yeah, right. Who do you think is the leader on the offense now? Seti says it has to be Daniel Jones. And then after that, it has to be John Michael Schmitz and John Runyon Jr. It would be Darius Slayton if he was, on the field and with the team. D-Kid said, so Pat, if Jones has a similar year to 2022, do we win more games? I don't think so. He needs to be better. No, I think he needs to be better. He needs to be better as a passer. Let's see. Barbara says, Bill, it probably goes by monthly views. If you wait until next month, I bet you'll be able to see it. Are you talking about daily news subscription? Let's see. Bill says it's $5 a week. I feel like you can get it cheaper than that. But yeah, maybe look for deals or sign up and then call up and see if they have any deals running or upcoming. Chronicle says, Tommy, how would that ever happen? Yeah, no. Joseph says Tommy DeVito is not a starting NFL quarterback. I agree. Yeah, all right, Bill. Yeah, current sale is $3 for a year, so I'm doing it. Yeah, do it. Come on. No harm, no foul. Super Unknown says, Pat, are all of your subs going to have a watch party this season? What do you mean by that, Super Unknown? Is Burns a good leader so far, says Chronicles? Yes, Burns is acting like a leader. He's walking like a leader. He's talking like a leader. He understands that the onus is on him with that contract to do it. And listen, Brian Burns is just as tired of losing as all of you guys and all the Giants are because he was on the Carolina Panthers. So he's not interested in doing any losing here in New York. He's trying to win some games. How's Theo Johnson looking? Athletic today, Enrique, getting good snaps with starters. I liked what I saw out of Theo today. I like what I see from him so far, and I'm excited to see him run block. I think he's going to help there. How does Flott look at CB2? Heard Neighbors burned him today. Neighbors just looked unguardable today. Flott as CB2, that's going to be a wait and see thing. But yeah, the secondary had its moments, but Neighbors was winning running his routes. Franklin says, I've got to subscribe to this. Can't believe we're talking with Pat like this. Pat, this is dope. Any news on how Nubin or Drew are playing? And Theo. Franklin, thanks for saying that. No, these are really fun, Franklin. I'm glad you found us. We typically do these Mondays and Thursdays at 9 p.m. We're going to skip Memorial Day. Like, we won't do Memorial Day next week. So we'll wait until next Thursday to do a post OTA practice one again, just like we were doing here tonight. So no Talkin Ball live on Memorial Day evening there at 9 p.m. that night. At least not planned as of now. If something develops, happens, changes, maybe. But that's in the cards. But Franklin, just so you know, during the offseason, we're keeping pretty much every week a Monday, Thursday schedule, unless I tell you guys otherwise. So Mondays and Thursdays, 9 p.m., post-game live chats after the games, home and road, right here after the Giants play, where I'm sitting there in the press box talking to you guys live right after coming out of the locker room, talking to the players and coaches and watching the game live. And plenty of other things to like on this channel, on YouTube Shorts, videos, interviews, and my podcast, the Talkin Ball with Pat Leonard podcast. We have plenty of great guests there. A lot already good, like in the queue and the hopper, even from past podcasts that you can go in and watch now. I think that you'll really like Justin Pugh, Bobby Okereke, Barry Sanders, etc. Nubin, didn't see much out of Nubin today. Didn't note as much out of Nubin today or Phillips that stood out to me, but definitely both guys that are getting groomed and installing the offense with the starters and the second team. Like I saw Phillips working with the first team at one point during like a slow like walk through install period, just standing there as a slot corner at one point. And I think, Belton today was active and involved. Also, though, like dropped an interception when he read the play. I think you got to give Newbin a chance. You drafted him in the second round. He's got to be on the field. Timothy contends, yes, Tommy is a starting quarterback. He's of Italian heritage, and he is like the Rocky Balboa of quarterbacks. I love it. I love it. He better play his ass off because we paid him a boatload of money for a player who hasn't had a 10 sack season, said Chronicles of Brian Burns. Bronx native says, does Jones pass for 20 plus touchdowns this year? 20 plus TDs. I'm going to say no. But you got to hope he does, right? They need him to. Super Unknown says Jones always looks good in practice, but never on Sundays, Monday nights, Thursday nights, Saturdays, and Sundays again, but the second Sunday night. Right. Daniel needs to, he just needs to step up. He knows it. He doesn't need anyone to tell him. Bill Hartnett says, tell your boss you got them at least one new subscriber. Yeah, cross promotion here on the pod. Michael says, yeah, this is dope. Yeah, Michael, great questions and contributions. Thank you, man. D Kit with another $5 super chat says, look, I'm not a Pat shill by any means, but any Giant fan not checking out this chat is badly missing out. To me, this is by far the best Giants gig. Thank you, D Kit. Yeah, man. Listen, I got nothing to hide. All I want to do is bring you guys my best information, insight, how I feel things are shaking out, predictions. They're not always going to be rosy. They're not always going to be negative. It's going to be what I see on a daily basis. So today, who I told you I saw what I liked and what I didn't like, those are my honest reactions. You have conversations with people, you do interviews. This is my full-time job and I'm happy to do it. And I'm lucky to do it. And I'm really excited about what we're building here, bringing it to you guys too. This is a really fun way to interact. And like I always say on these chats, super grateful for you guys participating and being on these, but also like you guys are really knowledgeable and you really add a lot to these chats, right? Not just sitting here listening to me. Like it's a great back and forth. El Gigante says, Pat, what do the Giants see in Daniel Jones that the rest of the NFL laughs at? Did you hear Mike Lombardi's take on Jones and how Mara has everything to do with Jones being here? Yeah, I did. I think his larger point too, Mike's larger point, which was dead on and on the money there, was I think it was the fact that the Giants in general just fall in love with their own players. So like they fall in love with their evaluations and they always want to give their guys one more chance, that kind of thing, even if it should be more likely time to cut bait. So, that's more the larger problem. And really, it does always go back to John Mara, whether it's coach and GM hires, whether it's retaining a guy like Dave Gettleman for 4 years running your team in the years, 2020 and 2021. Just ludicrous stuff. You know what I mean? So those are just killer decisions. And, they stayed with Eli Manning too long at the end of his career. That was Mike's larger point, which I think is on the money with how Mara and the Giants typically operate. Super Unknown says, Pat, you just said something I did not want to hear. Neighbors is killing the defense. That's what they said last year. Oy vey. Sorry. Franklin says, who's the X factor of the season, excluding Neal, Jones, and Neighbors? Any player you expect could break out that's under the radar? Franklin, Deonte Banks, I guess, would be a good answer to that. Like if Deonte Banks steps up and becomes a number one, because remember, first round pick, right? So I liked a lot of what we saw from Deonte last year, right? And I think he's capable of taking another step. Can he do it? We'll see. If he does that, right? Like, listen, this is not what I'm saying he's going to be, or I'm not predicting this, but I'm saying when you get to like 2016, right? When Janoris Jenkins, Jackrabbit, was on the outside when they paid him, right? He came here and he shut down a side of the field for Steve Spagnuolo's defense. Like, Rabbit and the way he shut down half of the field, that was the X factor in that season. There were a lot of guys who had great seasons that year. Landon Collins obviously played out of his mind, all these things. Olivier Vernon was a good addition, on and on. Odell Beckham Jr. on offense, popping some big plays. But Rabbit shutting down a half of the field changed the way teams could play against them. The defense controlled games. And so that would be my pick there. Franklin would be Deonte Banks, as a guy who could break out. And if he broke out, would be an X factor who could really change things and like help a defense like this actually be dominant. Because even if you're relying on that front four pass rush, you're not, they can't do it all, right? Densley says, why no on 20 plus TDs for Daniel Jones? Well, I just didn't like what I saw from the offensive line today. And Neighbors is a good player, but you need more than him making consistent plays, right? Mel says, thanks, guys. Good night. Thank you for being here, Mel's. Chronicles says, to get Sauce and Williams, it would be at least 3 rounders, but they're not even players the Jets would trade. No, they're not. Christian says, Pat, what's on the shelves behind you? Books look like... Yeah, no, a bunch of books here. I have, let's see. I have How About Them Cowboys by Gary Myers, Beyond the Game by Gary Smith, Michael Lewis Moneyball, Millennial Money by my good friend Patrick O'Shaughnessy, Football for a Buck, Jeff Pearlman, Belichick by Ian O'Connor, Gridiron Genius, Michael Lombardi. Let's see. All That's Left, a poetry book by my good friend Bill Ehrlich. Football Done Right, Michael Lombardi. Gary Myers, My First Coach. So a lot of sports books, some not sports books. We got Once a Giant over here by Gary as well. D Kit says, newsflash, Maras have owned the teams for 100 years. They are who they are, and they are not changing ever. Blazing Brazen says, Mara needs to sell the team. It's been crap since he forced Coughlin out. D Kit says, I'm out. Awesome show as usual. I passed up poker night for this episode. I need professional help. D Kit, thank you so much. And thank you for the super chats. I can see what you did is you took the money that you were going to lose at poker and you supported the channel. I really appreciate that. No, just kidding. I'm sure you would have won at poker. So it's even more thankful that you flipped it around and supported us. And DK, really do appreciate you make great points. You have great insight, and you support us with those super chats. I really do appreciate you. Christian says, if Banks turns into a feared corner, the whole defense works, in my opinion. Yeah, that'd be a huge key to unlock it. Franklin says, last question from me. Any way the Giants trade for a player who helps the offense as this could be Daboll's last go. I do think they're keeping their eyes open to everything, Franklin, but right now, if you noticed, all their additions lately have been like veteran salary benefit, minimum contract type deals. So they don't have a lot of cap room right now. You could obviously rework some contracts to make some room and add somebody. So I personally think they should be keeping their eyes and ears open and being aggressive there. If, listen, once you do a Brian Burns type trade, then you're signaling what you're trying to do and the pressure you're under, right? So keep your eyes and ears open. But so far recently, it seems less likely they make a big investment because they don't want to kick too much money, down the road, right? It's more about this season. Bill says you need to check out Blood and Guts, How Tight Ends Save Football. It's on my list of books. Is that Tyler Dunn? Yeah, Tyler does great work. Super Unknown says, Pat, stop trying to front. You did not read any of those books. I did. Listen, I actually strategically, there are some back there or, in other places I haven't read yet, but I don't put the ones I don't read up there. No, I'm not a phony. Bill Hartnett says, whole section on Shockey. Interesting. Christian says, Pat, I know media have to be impartial, but what football team do you personally follow, if any? Well, a team like I root for is Notre Dame because I went to Notre Dame, graduated in 2006, go Irish, and I can root for them. NFL, like I don't root for NFL. I follow the whole league though, and I watch it closely. I get into Game Pass. Was always a big fantasy football player and huge football fan. And I wrote a fantasy football blog for the Daily News. Started their fantasy football blog along with James Parziali when I first came to the paper in 2010, 2011, around then, called the Fantasy Huddle. So I was always a big fantasy football guy. I do less of it now than I used to. I do daily fantasy, which I love, but not as involved now, more into the real thing now. But I'm into it. I'm into all of it, Christian. Like I love the league. I mean, I love watching the league. And but no, there's no like personal allegiances there. Bronx says, besides Neighbors, which rookie do you see shining this season? Theo Johnson's my pick right now. I mean, you need Tyler Nubin as a pretty high second round pick to be a significant contributor, though. So you do need it to be Nubin, I think. But Theo Johnson, I think, based on the opportunity and also what I've seen so far, I think could end up being the guy who shines the most next to Neighbors. Franklin said, okay, real last question. Do you know if the Giants, Shane and Dable, are viewing this as who cares about next year's cap if you get fired mentality, or are they looking to still, quote, build this? Franklin, that's a great question. I do think that Shane, I think Shane views this because what he said publicly and out loud to us, both publicly and privately, is about how this is a rebuild, how they're still in the process of this. He's essentially trying to craft an understanding and a narrative that, like, the only way to build this right is to continue building it because they're still not there, right? So, which is essentially the GM saying to ownership, give me more time. So Shane is viewing this as a build, right? So that's where, like, making a big move for somebody where you're then putting a ton of money into the future, can that harm your build just to save your job now? Then again, like, sometimes when your back is against the wall, you don't mind putting money into the future because it's like, well, the next regime is going to have to deal with that problem. It's not going to be me. I just need to win. Right. But I think the answer to that is they view it more as a build. Like Joe Shane is trying to get ownership to see and continue to look at this and view at this as a build. Christian said, I'd love to see a signing in the backfield. Fabian Moreau was a solid pickup. So defensive backfield. Got it. If you can't tell, I worry about the secondary. I feel like it's the biggest what if. I agree. Mike says, Pat, what would you think if Dable was fired this year, but Shane was kept? I think Dable is on thin ice given how last season went. And so I would think that it was a carryover of that and problems not rectified in that regard. And really just the fact that the first season didn't end up fully reflecting exactly who this coach was. Like, it showed some positives, but the negatives weren't as obvious at first. And it would have turned out that, he did some things in Buffalo, but also, was working with one of the best quarterbacks in the league, right? There's that chicken and the egg conversation, right? So Brian Dable right now is trying to prove that it wasn't just that it was Josh Allen, it was what he did to help develop Josh Allen. So can he do that with Daniel Jones? Can he do that with the Giants offense? So that could be one obvious reason why Shane could stay and Dable would go. And also, like I said, John Mara said he doesn't necessarily view Shane and Dable as a package deal. So that was an interesting comment by the owner when he said that at the owners' meetings. So that's another reason why it wouldn't shock me or surprise me. But I do think that Shane's moves and signings and, some of it's been good, right? Like Okereke was a great signing. But, some of the moves he made this offseason, they need to hit. Runyon Jr., Jermaine Illuminor, Brian Burns, like these things need to hit. Jim says, Pat, given this is likely Daniel Jones' last season and the low expectations for the Giants this season, do you have any thoughts on who the Giants would draft next year, assuming we have a top 5 to 8 round 1 pick? I do not know exactly who their guy is versus who it isn't, Jim. Still early there, but people I've talked to asking them what they think the Giants should do after this at quarterback, assuming they're moving on next year, they all point to the draft, feeling like the Giants should get a young guy under a rookie contract. Christian says it's almost criminal that they have not drafted a QB for Dable. That was the intent this year. That was the goal. They mismanaged last season their way right out of that top pick after falling flat on their face for sure. Guys, this has been an amazing chat. We've gone over 2 hours again. Tons of support from the super chatters. D-Kit coming in big into the chat tonight as well. Let's Let's see. Christian notes that you hired Dable for his ability to develop a quarterback. Yep. And that's why play calling makes sense. But guys, thank you so much again. We had Joel Lopez, Jay Jan, Beast of the East, D-Kit, Joe Freed, James Myers, Chris, let's see, Peter Randazzo, Tudo, Bill Hartnett, Christian H, Franklin, all you guys. Thank you so much for those super chats and super stickers. And anybody who asked a question, participated. And, whether we agreed or disagreed, guys, I promise you, even if I push back on things or I reject a premise or I tell you I think that that's wrong and I think I know the answer or whatever it is, this is all great stuff. Like, I love disagreement. I love debate. I love arguments, as long as we keep it respectful. And that's what I love about this is it does stay respectful. We all respect each other's time. We're spending a ton of time late at night talking about the team and the sport that we love, that we're passionate about, and that we spend every day on and around. So thank you so much. Remember, we are sponsored by Bet Online, also by Estate 98 Coffee. It's an Essentia Day Cafe from El Salvador. Dates back to 1798. Takes 3 seconds to make a nice coffee. I drink it all the time when I'm doing Talkin Ball. Something else, a friend of mine, this company, Future Fans Football, for any of you who want to teach your kids about football. Maybe you didn't play football yourself, but it has some literature to get started, some activities, some way to teach the game to young children. Futurefans.com, I believe it is. But interesting deal with Father's Day coming up, maybe a good gift. But check it out. Let's see. Christian says, I'm glad the Dre comment sparked a healthy debate. Yeah, no, that was good. Bill says, thanks for the show, Pat. Christian says, thank you for the stream, Pat. True man of the people. Appreciate you. Thanks again. So we will not plan on doing one on Memorial Day, but we will be back next Thursday with our next Talkin Ball live. So that will be Thursday, the 30th. We will see you back then there, but stay tuned for more Talkin Ball with Pat Leonard episodes. A really special guest coming next week. Really excited to show you guys that episode. If you didn't catch it already, go listen to me and Sandro Platzgummer, the former Giants running back from Austria, who now plays in Germany for the Frankfurt Galaxy. Go listen to him and me talk about the Giants playing in Germany, preview that game against the Panthers, what it means, how big it is over there. Sandro reflects on his time with the Giants, updates us on a crazy schedule he's keeping right now, and was a really good conversation with a former Giant. But thank you so much for being here, as always. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I did. We'll talk to you next time on Talkin Ball Live with Pat Leonard here on the Believe Network and on the YouTube channel at PL on NFL. See you next time.